else the stream goes, who cares? So the first story is about Apple, and it's from a source you might have heard of called Apple. And so this is probably they probably have their facts straight on this one. Apple's reporting their quarterly revenue because, as you know, if you've been listening to every day, as many of us do, we're back in quarter earnings report season, and now Apple's reporting revenue of $123.9 billion. That's more than $1 billion a day, by the way, and up 11% year over year. I have to say, being the world's largest company and growing at 11% is pretty impressive. Net income of 34.6 billion, up from 28.8 a year ago. So again, about an 11% growth there. And services sales of about 20 billion, up from 16. So again, about 15% growth there. iPhone sales of 71 billion, etc. Gotta hand it to the Apple, man. To continue to grow at that scale is just humbling to witness and watch. And a bunch of people tweeting, like Aaron Levy, the very clever tweeter who's the boss at Box.com, says Apple just made 124 billion in a single quarter, building great product and hyper-focus pays. Yep, that's how most CEOs will take it. It's impressive, even for CEOs like himself from Box. You gotta hand. It's just impressive. It's like, holy cow. So, Jamie over there in Twitter Spaces, seems like you got your hand up. JT's got his hand up. Clinton, you got your hand up. Why don't you go first, and then we'll hand it over to Jamie. Go ahead. Oh, hang on. I gotta check the cable for the Twitter Space audio. Give me 2 seconds here. Clinton, if you would indulge me, please count to 10, sir. Go ahead.
8,
there
7,
there you go.
6,
we're good.
5.
All right.
Clinton DeVoe here. Thank you, Tyler, for bringing me back on again. Writer with the Hill Times in Ottawa, as well as Troy Media in Canada. The Apple story, fascinating story. The thing that's most interesting to me when I look at it is, as you pointed out, they found a way to increase their margins. To me, the bigger story is that when it comes to the iPhone business, we're not seeing the huge growth in numbers that we would have seen from Apple, 10 years ago. Sure. Or 5 years ago.
Sure.
And so to me, I think to look for, and there's been some, I've been hearing some stories out of Wall Street that Apple, believe it or not, is looking to get into the electric vehicle business.
Oh yeah, that's well known. But by the way, we've been covering that development regularly. The latest news is kind of concerning, that many of their most senior people on the Apple Car team have recently departed. It was the most recent news that we heard sometime this week, around Monday or Tuesday. You guys probably recall that one. And some of them going to Tesla, no doubt. And by the way, Tesla was the first company to know that Apple was doing this, because Tesla was losing people to Apple, and that's not a big. There's a limited number of people who have the expertise to participate in these ventures, and so when Tesla is losing people to Apple, they know goddamn well Apple's going to try and build a car with those people, and so Elon was the first to kind of have the insider scoop on that, and now the tide is turning. There's notably some early departures out of the Apple Car camp, but that's a little concerning. You guys remember that headline we read? That was the gist of the article, that some of them, a concerning number of the senior team members from the Apple Car team are departing prematurely. That's clearly not good news. But no doubt they've invested. It's called Project Titan, if I remember correctly, is the internal project name for the Apple Car. It's as typical with Apple. There's very little details known at the moment, if it's going to be fully autonomous or not, if it's going to have a steering wheel or not. Knowing Apple, it might not even have fucking wheels. You know how Apple is. So they like to remove things. So JT, do you remember some of these headlines? No doubt, being an Apple fanboy as you are.
I was going to bring something up Apple related. We heard a report a few weeks ago, probably, that Apple was supposedly not interested in the metaverse, that if it was off limits, and then
and then
just a
snowball people, yeah,
like and then just a few, I think it was yesterday or whenever they had the that meeting, someone had asked Tim Cook, what does he think about the metaverse, and he responded by saying he sees a lot of potential in it, and that they're actually investing accordingly. So that was like a huge contradiction to the previous report.
He did an interview with Kara Swisher where he even said that the future of the company is AR, believe it or not. Like AR is a bedrock of the future of the company. Like they are huge on AR. And I was trying to read between the lines, as I do when I watch interviews with CEOs like that. And I was getting the impression that they're specifically, uniquely interested in AR, betting heavy on AR, and that they're a little even, it sounded to me like he was concerned about VR, that could be a bit of a could lead to a dark place that they don't necessarily feel is net positive for humanity, and thus don't necessarily want to participate in it. And they see a lot of this with the iPhone app addiction, and that's why they've added all of the parental controls and the trying to get you to take a break from your phone and trying to get you to have a healthy diet of your media consumption. And that might go out the window with VR, because VR could be, one way to think of it is, the fentanyl, heroin version of, content consumption. I mean, we binge.
That's exactly what they're thinking right now.
Yeah, that's how it felt to me by listening to him talk about it. And it's not something that I would have picked up in text. It's one of those. This is why tech conferences and sit down long form interviews are so critically important, because you get to hear there's something that's communicated in person that is missed in text at times. And had I read Tim's words, I wouldn't have picked up on the sentiment that Matt and I seem to have similarly picked up on, which is he seems genuinely concerned, has genuine concerns about VR, about Apple's role in it, and if they want to participate in that. AR, on the other hand, he emphasized you're out and about, you're walking around, you're not pigeonholed in your closet all day. And
well, Tyler, if I may, there's two axes, right? There's the viability of a car, and I think since their announcement, how many years ago? 7 years ago on the car.
Right.
It's incredibly hard to build a car from the outside in.
Right.
It's easy to have an OS, right? That's easy. That's done. The other axis is, what's the model? Like, are we going to be gas? Well, obviously, they're not going to be gas. They're going to be EV. But what's the ownership? What's the adoption of EV? What is is it going to be a rental? Do you need a car anymore after the pandemic? And I think the axis, which you noted so wisely, is like VR introduces all these other things around addiction that we've seen over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years around social media, for good or bad. And I think they're trying to take a slow roll both on the car and the social media aspect of it. I mean, are you going to be immersed to the point where you're going to be disconnected, which is the reverse or the inverse of addicted? It's not sobriety, it's connectedness. And are you going to be connected to something that's not really connected to something that's psychologically good for people? And I think there's been numerous articles that have sort of built up to those two axes.
You know what's
just
my
2 cents.
You know what's so weird about that? This room that we do here together, multiple hours every day, is in some sense virtual. And as we just read from somebody who just Carolyn Vasos just wrote in to say how much she appreciates it and how it's helpful professionally. And by the way, there was a really interesting exchange on Twitter between Jason, who joins us almost every day. Is he on stage at the moment in either app? He's normally in the Twitter Spaces app. Jason, are you in there today? No. And somebody else, gosh, who was it? Somebody that was saying they have a 13-hour drive. Clinton, it was you. You were saying you have a 13-hour solo drive coming up, and Jason says, yeah, the tech news is great for helping in situations like that. And I had not really considered it that way, but he's absolutely right. Like, if I haven't had to take a long drive since we've started doing tech news episodes, and it would be a little tricky to do as a moderator, but as a listener, my God, as somebody, if I knew I had to do like a 6, 7, 8, 9 hour drive, you better believe I would be in Clubhouse during a lot of that. I would make the.
And it was a long, painful drive, just so you know. A 13-hour drive is not enjoyable,
right,
for anybody.
Right. Yeah. You kind of tap. Most people tap out right around the 8-hour mark, and I can speak from experience as somebody who toured America as a musician, and I was the designated driver for a lot of those van tours. So I know of what you speak, sir. And I had to say, as much as we might be seeming like we're bad mouthing VR, what we're doing in this room is a variation on that theme, and I would argue that it's incredibly positive what we are all here about in some kind of way, and I'm hopeful that what we're doing here might even be enhanced. I'm willing to be optimistic for the time being until proven otherwise. That there's reason to still not be pessimistic about VR. So we'll see how it all shakes out, because it's all right on our doorstep. The thing that concerns me is, of course, and to be dystopian for a second, is there's a lot of people who are looking for escapism in all forms of Netflix binging and food and sex and drugs and all of it. And they're going to have, are they going to have a whole new one on their hands in the form of VR. Yeah. And the fact that, Mark Zuckerberg is a borderline Asperger's, I think self-admittedly, I believe I heard him say that. I don't want to project anything there, but I recall some kind of self-diagnosis of being on some kind of spectrum that, to some people it's such a weird consideration. Is that actually more connection? Well, in the case of this room, it kind of is in a healthy, positive way. Or are we fooling ourselves? Or are the people who are going to be roaming around the metaverse constantly, is that connection going to be quote unquote real or quote unquote virtual, like the word virtual reality? I never realized how those two words fit together in that way. They're kind of contradictory. One is real, one is virtual. Yeah. Go ahead, JT.
I think the solution here is not fully VR when it comes to the metaverse. I think the solution that solves this problem is mixed reality, the ability to go from VR fully enclosed into augmented reality. So when that capability and functionality comes to scale where you're able to go outside with your actual mixed reality glasses and are able to essentially, walk around the city, walk into a museum, walk to the park, and be able to actually experience the physical metaverse. I think this is where Niantic sort of comes into play and how they view the metaverse, where it's really enhancing the world around you and being able to share those kind of experiences in the actual real world, while also giving you the ability to, if you are at home or when you return back home or when you're on the train or whatever, you're able to go into the more enclosed metaverse and traverse the areas around there, but at the same time be able to interact with those that are on the outside as well. And so this grand vision of being able to sort of converge all these different ecosystems into one is where it sort of solves that problem or that perception that you're fully enclosed into a VR headset that is somewhat, disturbing. But I think once the technology progresses to a state where we're fully in mixed reality, again, going from VR to AR and vice versa, I think that's going to probably ease the minds of people because they have sort of the option to actually experience some of these cool things out in the real world that is not fully developed at the moment. We still have like low-level kind of AR shared experiences. I think that's still is currently progressing. I think we're going to see a lot of more shared real-time persistent content throughout this year. And Snap, Facebook, Instagram, they're all pushing towards that in addition to Niantic. So I'm actually hopeful. I'm not on the other side where where people, there's some good arguments that people make on the VR side, especially when it comes to mental health, and obviously we're starting to sort of see the small steps or sort of the small examples of that. But I'm optimistic and hopeful that something is going to work out for the better of humanity.
Amen. Yeah, let's be hopeful. But also, keep our eyes open for because wouldn't we all, if we could go back in time to when Facebook was starting and Twitter was starting, literally in a time machine, wouldn't we go back and try and talk to people and be like, hey, be careful with how this plays out. You might mess up some elections and yada, yada, yada. Similarly, because of the VR could be exponentially more impactful, shouldn't we also be exponentially more cautiously aware of the potential negative landslide that could ensue? So I think we should keep our eyes and ears open for potential negatives that could grow exponentially. So
but Tyler, one thing, although we have actually discussed it since Mark actually given the keynote speech at length and different aspects of it, but I was thinking the other day, it's been almost like over 20 years when I had my first wireless hands-free, and the biggest dilemma at that time was people didn't figure it out that whether I'm talking to them or I'm talking on the phone. And I remember that, it was such a confusion to people that, I'm talking on the phone and they are thinking that, this person is talking to himself. Now, being unsocial, which is very commonly used, that, you're sitting around on your phone, talking, whatnot, and being unsocial, quote unquote. And here you are, at least we're going to be moving away from this. When we actually go into the VR world, that we're not going to be accused of being unsocial, because we're going to be in totally separate environment where you can interact with all those people who are going to be in the VR. And another aspect is the kids who are growing up right now, they are already playing those games. Doesn't matter whether they have the glasses on or not. They have some sort of an immersive experience while they're playing the Fortnite and all the rest of it. They are so much into it, it's just unbelievable. We cannot actually have the similar sort of experience what they are experiencing already. So once they actually go into that environment, that's going to be a lot more immersive for them, and we are just catching up pretty much. Mm-hmm. So is that kind of is going to catch up in a bit, and we're going to be got to have a live with it basically.
Yeah. I want to dig through. We didn't fully get through the first big topic, which was the Apple quarter reports. There was a whole bunch of interesting details that we should just touch on very briefly. One of them is that Apple sales in China rose 21%, which is quite significant because the average was 13% across the company. So 21 in China is very significant, and that is obviously related in some part, at least, to the what do we call them? Bans, the U.S. banning Qualcomm from selling 5G antennas to the Chinese handset manufacturers. So if you want a 5G phone in China, you pretty much have to buy an iPhone. Wink, wink. So that could be part of it, no doubt. And similarly, Apple's sales dropped in Japan 14%. Well, they're not being banned for anything. Again, just to highlight an interesting difference. And what might be to me the most interesting data point comes again from Variety, the Hollywood, movie, publication. And their point says that
Tyler, I may have a reason for you why Japan sales dropped, because many Chinese come over to Japan to buy iPhone back home. Tourists, no tourists.
Oh, there were no tourists. Oh, that's interesting. Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, normally there's a whole bunch of Apple sales from Chinese visiting Japan, which are no longer happening. Great point, Cheryl. That is a great point. Yeah. Next point that I thought was even more interesting is that Apple has now 785 million paying subscribers. That means their credit cards are being charged monthly by Apple. That means they have your credit card and they're charging it monthly. What's interesting about that? Well, that means they have a financial relationship with you. They have your credit card on file as part of your profile. which means the headline that we read yesterday about Apple getting into credit, allowing pretty much anybody to charge credit cards. Well, they already have your credit card. They've got everybody's credit card. They got 785 million of everybody's credit cards. And this is what keeps the banks awake at night, is that Apple's going to start pushing their heads deeper into the banking space, being that they've got, nearly 1 billion people's financial details and credit cards on files. That would make them a very considerable bank if they were to really pursue that angle wholeheartedly, and they might. That could be an interesting development to stay on top of. And they have 1.8 billion active devices worldwide. I'd be curious to know if they could figure out what's the real actual number of device owners, because many of those are duplicate owners with multiple devices, of course. But it's somewhere between 785 million who are subscribers and 1.8 billion devices. So kind of cut it down the middle. Maybe you've got 1.2 billion active Apple users. That's pretty impressive, I gotta say. Last on the Apple front, I think is the one that BB was jumping on at the start, which is the iOS 15.4 beta that is around the corner and coming out, adds Face ID use with a mask. There we go. We did it. Without needing Apple Watch authentication, by recognizing unique features around your eyes. Oh, snap. Did we talk about this before? Did we ever talk about Apple knowing your identity from your iris? Do you guys remember the, 56 times I've done that rant previously? That in the near future, Apple...
I remember the 5-hour conversation that happened that made me stick in tech news around the world.
Right.
That
so
was a great conversation.
Do you all mind me doing it a 57th time for those who might not have heard that rant? Here's what's so interesting about this. It's way more interesting than it appears, I assure you. Here's why. Because in the near future, like in the iOS 15.4 beta that's coming out right now, Apple will be able to unlock your phone even with a mask on. And you're thinking, wait a minute, how's that work? Because facial recognition works with the several points around your mouth, around your nose. Yes, your eyes, but your eyes are probably not enough. Well, not so fast. Because it turns out that the cameras in the latest phones and laptops, and no doubt the VR, AR, whatever headsets they're working on, and by the way, the iPad Pro was the first to have a remarkably good selfie-facing camera. And this impressive new high-fidelity camera on the front of the iPad Pros and the new iPhone 13s and the new MacBook Pros could, theoretically, somebody should really dig into this. Well, we don't really need to dig into it, because if they're authenticating you based on your eyes, that's their own words. The question is that biometric eye width? Are we to suspect that they've mastered facial recognition down to just your eyes, or is it identifying you based on your iris, which can be done? We know very well that there's iris scans. That's a very well-known technology, very well understood technology. That's a whole other ball game, because if they're doing it through your iris, then there's an additional level of concern here. Here's why. Because through your iris, you can detect somebody's gender from their iris with near zero false identification there, and their age with nearly 100% accuracy, right? Through an iris. By the way, you can detect who the person is, right? Like 1 out of 8 billion people can be detected from their iris. So detecting their gender or their age is absolutely kindergarten trivial compared to detecting their identity. You understand that? 1 out of 8 billion. That's kind of tricky, hard to do. 1 out of 2, fucking cakewalk, right? So don't try and play me like, I'm not so sure they can detect my age or gender. Are you kidding me? They can detect you out of 8 billion people. Come on, get real. So
how many does it recognize?
How many what?
Genders.
Great question. So it can detect the gender, the age, the biometric identity, that's you, separate from everybody else on the planet, your physical health, meaning if you've ever had a concussion, chronic pain, vision disorders, obesity, Parkinson's disease, on and on, Your mental health, if you have depression, PTSD, autism, eating disorders, you get the idea. Your personality trait, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, high in curiosity, etc., your skills and abilities, like your level of sleepiness, your drug consumption of things like alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, MDMA, and cannabis, your mental workload, amongst many other factors. And there you have the beginnings of the mother of all ad networks, which, gee, I wonder if Apple's working on an ad network. Oh, gee, well, it turns out they just tried to hire Facebook's biggest ad network guru, Antonio Garcias, or what, forgive me for not recalling his last name, Antonio, who joins us in Clubhouse very often. Who used to come in Clubhouse all the time, was hired by Apple as the Facebook ad guru. And Apple, that's a clear, obvious indicator that Apple has very strong ambitions in building an ad network. By the way, so does cutting off the data to Facebook and all the other parties. It's also a very strong signal that Apple is indeed going to build the walled garden in their own massive ad network. The ability to all of those data points that I just read off about drug consumption, sleep consumption, physical health, biometric identity, age, gender, whatnot, that is way more juicy, sweet. This so much sweeter data than anything people have about you from which, website you visited, that it would make the mother lode of all ad networks that would be worth $1 trillion. So don't kid me for 2 seconds that they don't have the motive or incentive to do this. They have all the motive and incentive in the world. They just need the technology to do it. And it turns out, it looks like they are on the verge of having it, because the fact that this maskless facial recognition, it would be very interesting to dive into precisely how they're doing it. Let's put it that way. So, end of rant on that one yet again. So we'll find out. But regardless, in the not so distant future, they will be doing iris scanning on you, especially in the VR headsets, because that at that point it will be trivial. JT, you wanted to say something there? Were you flashing your mic?
Not so much. That's definitely the gold standard, I would say, of data collection, right? Biometric and health data.
Yeah.
You couple that with traditional 2D data, couple that with the new and emerging 3D and spatial data. Now you have a ad network of a data collection database of just crazy proportions that you can pretty much do precise targeting on so many different levels and scales. Is just crazy.
Okay, so the next.
I have a quick question on Apple before we move on. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, I noticed that in their net sales by category, the services section had jumped like over 25% year over year.
Yeah.
So would anyone know how or what services are doing that?
Apple reports Mac revenue up 25% year over year. Give me 2 seconds where it says services. Year over
it's
year.
The App Store.
Services
Isn't that the App Store?
Services.
Yeah, of 20 billion, previously 16. So yeah, about 20 to 25% on services. Yes. It's in, let me see here, on their own page. Let me see what it says. Give me 2 seconds here, and pardon for cutting off. This quarter, according to Tim Cook, quote, this quarter's record results were made possible by our most innovative lineup of products and services ever. This very strong customer response to our recent launch of new products and services drove double-digit growth, yada, yada, yada. And then it says, including delivering to marketplace, stimulating customer demand, services, and the geographic company server. I'm reading everything about the services, and they don't really break it down in a way that would be useful to answer your question, and which is why you're asking it, no doubt. So it leaves us a little hanging to figure out what, precisely as you just asked. It would be nice to break.
Tyler, wouldn't it be all the proceeds from the App Store? That all constitutes towards the actual services, no?
So
services,
Tyler, I'm just.
Hey, Babatunde, hold on 1 second. It could, their services would mean things like iCloud, Apple TV, Apple Fitness, blah 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 blah. So, by the way, those things are still relatively early. Like Apple TV and Apple Fitness and even iCloud are still in the earlier stages of development, and it's not inconceivable that they would grow 25% now because they weren't available in the first, I don't know, 8 versions of the iPhone, even most of those things. So still plenty of early days growth in that section. Sorry to cut you off, Babatunde, and welcome, because I know you've been having your hand up in previous meetings because one of my favorite musicians, it happens to be Babatunde Olatunji from Nigeria. So
wow.
I happen to know you must be. Are you Aidu, by the way?
Yeah, I'm Nigerian though.
Yeah. Well, I know that Babatunde Olatunji is Aidu, and I'm a huge fan. And so anyone that shares his name is welcome on this stage anytime.
Nice. Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me. I mean, it's always I share. I think was Catherine's sentiments. Whom you mentioned in the beginning, who learns a lot from these sessions with everyone. I share that sentiment too. Just checking on the services, I noticed the same thing about the services, and not only has the services revenue grown year on year, it's grown as a percentage of the net sales. So and you're right, Tyler. When you check the website, what are listed under those services are stuff like Apple TV, Apple Music, and Apple Fitness and stuff like that. And for me, I think it just shows how far Apple has come as a platform company. I think they've really solidified and perfected that art of becoming a platform company. And as a platform company, you're looking more of subscription services. I would predict, or I want to predict, that in the next quarterly revenue earnings, we would be seeing that figure even go up at least double digits again, and that is as a result of Apple really, ramping up on their subscription services and adding on to that. So I think we would expect that to continue to go up as time goes up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, it
So
totally makes
Apple,
sense.
sorry, Khurram.
Sorry, go
Apple
ahead.
services revenue went up 25% this quarter.
Yeah. Go ahead,
It
Ram.
actually, Tyler, it totally makes sense. So basically, on the iCloud, I've recently started actually noticing because everybody is actually taking more pictures, putting using WhatsApp, all these incoming messages with the videos and all that is coming in. So if you look at the jump, so it's 99 cents, then it goes to 2.99, and then it jumps all the way to 9.99. So that's where now more and more people are actually switching from 2.99 to 9.99 because it's going more so than 200 GB. And that's where the real jump comes in. And that's where they're going to see the actual growth properly because, the pictures are going out of hand, totally. And it's just like your 256 GB is not enough anymore. You have to go for 512 minimum. Like if you are a heavy user with the pictures, taking a lot of videos, and, all these incomings are
Good
coming
point.
through the WhatsApp and all that. So
Good point.
that's where their real money is.
Oh, it's a good point because as the cameras get better, you're starting to do 4K video. 4K video takes up a lot of space, and now next thing you know, you've got 100 gigabytes of space, just to get by, or a terabyte of cloud space, or what have you, just to handle all of your higher fidelity videos and photos and whatnot. It's a good point. So the next big topic, shall we, is that about the FTC, Federal Trade Commission. The U.S. consumers lost $770 million to social media scams in 2021, about 25% of all fraud losses for the year, and up 18 times, so 1,800% from the $42 million in losses reported in 2017. A growing number of U.S. consumers are getting scammed on social media, according to a new report by the Federal Trade Commission. Well, in some sense, this is not a big surprise. During COVID, you had a whole bunch of people who had to get very creative about how to add dollars to their bank accounts while sitting at home watching, soap operas and scamming people. If you didn't previously have an occupation at home, gave some people a new revenue stream. And they might have been, you have a whole bunch of people who were kind of desperate to figure out how to make money from home, and scams might have fallen in that category. So
I wonder how much of those are like NFT related, because I get so many NFT DMs from people around the world asking me to like click this link or whatever. It's crazy.
Oh, same. I block them for good. I block them all the time. Blocker.
The next topic is from the New York Times. An investigation into the rise of NSO's Pegasus shows its widespread use by the CIA, the UAE, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and others. The FBI bought but didn't use it, according to the New York Times. Well, that's probably, if the FBI is buying it and not using it, well, by the way, just to give you, this is kind of an open secret. The FBI has their own version of Pegasus. America has its own version of Pegasus, but they don't need to sell it to other countries in the same way that Israel does, right? So now we're getting into some really insider baseball geopolitics here, cyber politics, because by sharing, if Israel developed Pegasus, we know they did, and then sell it to the UAE and Mexico and other countries that don't have the means of building it themselves, now Israel's able to collect intelligence on the people they're selling it to, obviously. Now, the US obviously can build their own version of Pegasus and obviously has it. And they're not selling it to other countries because maybe they have, whatever. But that would explain why they bought Pegasus and don't use it, because they don't need it, but they do want to know everything about it. If you can pick up what I'm laying down here. Now, I haven't read the article, but I now have it in front of me. It says, the battle for the world's most powerful crypto weapon. A Times investigation reveals how Israel reaped diplomatic gains around the world from NSO's Pegasus spyware, a tool America itself purchased but is now trying to ban. Well, yeah, because they have their own version and they don't want everyone else having anything like it. They want to keep all of that crazy cyber intelligence gathering for themselves. So it says, in June of 2019, 3 Israeli computer engineers arrived at a New Jersey building used by the FBI. They unpacked dozens of computer servers, arranged them on tall racks in an isolated room. As they set up the equipment, the engineers made a series of calls to their bosses in Tel Aviv at the headquarters of NSO Group, the world's most notorious maker of spyware. Then, with their equipment in place, they began testing. The FBI had bought a version of Pegasus, NSO's premier spying tool. For nearly a decade, the Israeli firm had been selling its surveillance software on a subscription basis to law enforcement and intelligence agencies around the world, promising that it could do what no one else could do. Consistently and reliably crack the encrypted communications of any iPhone or Android smartphone. Since NSO had introduced Pegasus to the global market in 2011, it had helped Mexican authorities capture Joaquin Guzman Loera, the drug lord known as El Chapo. European investigators have quietly used Pegasus to thwart terrorist plots, fight organized crime, and in one case take down a global child abuse ring, identifying dozens of suspects in more than 40 countries. In a broader sense, NSO's products seem to solve one of the biggest problems facing law enforcement and intelligence agencies in the 21st century. The criminals and terrorists had better technology for encrypting their communications than investigators had to decrypt them. The criminal world had gone dark even as it was increasingly going global. And what they're referring to there is the benefit of Tor networks and end-to-end encryption tools and whatnot. And then this gave power back into the hand, the ultimate upper hand to the intelligence agencies who were previously didn't have the upper hand. And it's a very, very long article, and it talks about this NSO group relationship with the FBI. An FBI spokesperson said that the FBI examines new technologies not just to explore a potential legal use, but also to combat crime and to protect both the American people and our civil liberties. That means we routinely identify, evaluate, and test technical solutions and services for a variety of reasons, including possible operation and security concerns they might pose in the wrong hands. And it's just because they asked the FBI, hey, we see that you met with Pegasus. Do you mind telling us what that's about? And they said, yeah. We examine other technologies out there just to see what they're all about. there we go. It's a very long article, no doubt a good read, worth reading. And thanks you to Cheryl for sharing it at the top of the Clubhouse room and the Twitter Space room. But there's no real fine points to that one to dive into. So we will jump into the next topic, which is Microsoft and 35 U.S. states, led by Utah, support Epic Games against Apple through amicus curiae. Where's Jennifer? Jennifer, what the hell is this? Amicus curiae? It's some Latin legal term that I've never heard of. Amicus curiae briefs filed with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Biden administration is also supporting Epic. Apple just reported record numbers, but they now have a new issue on their hands in the Apple versus Epic, where Microsoft, which it was already known Microsoft was backing Epic, by the way, and in fact, Apple's accusing Microsoft of secretly being the main engine behind the whole.
Hey, Tyler.
Yes.
Amicus curiae means friend of the court.
And it means. Thank you, Francine. So Microsoft and 35 U.S. states led by Utah support Epic Games against Apple. Okay, so they've got their homework to do for the next quarter. The next one is that Barron's said they have sources that the White House is readying or preparing an executive action to task federal agencies with regulating Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a matter of national security. Oh boy. Here we go. Shit's about to get real. This whole, dating, Tinder flirting. We were at the very early stages of this courtship ritual between the U.S. and Bitcoin. And boy, did China kind of, went full steam with things, and they got hot and heavy, and then they banned it. And then Russia recently did the same. And that's as to be expected, because China makes decisions rather expeditiously on these types of issues. And
Tyler?
Yes?
It's MA. I don't know if you heard that Russia Putin actually stopped that ban.
Yes.
And is allowing the mining to continue because he wants to keep competitive.
Yeah. What the article we read, the headline related to that was that he wanted to use it in places that had excess energy capabilities to go ahead and allocate those additional energy resources to crypto mining rather than have it go to waste, which makes all the sense in the world. The question is, though, how will they allow Russians to use Bitcoin? Is kind of obviously related but separate question.
Yeah, in that article, if that's the same article, if it was read, I mean, that was probably the quickest TLDR, but in the article it does state that he was discussing about the fact that he wanted to not be knocked out of the cryptocurrency sort of game, as you so right. We've been following. Right. And that is why he was putting a stop to that. And that's why he's moving the mining to those countries, those three that I can't pronounce. They're three parts of Russia that I can't pronounce. But he did say inside that same article that he sees the competitiveness and wants to make sure that Russia is in that game.
Mm-hmm. So this headline here about the U.S. and the National Security Memorandum, expected to come in the next few weeks, would task parts of the government with analyzing digital assets and assembling a regulatory framework that covers crypto, stablecoins, and NFTs. Quote, this is designed to look holistically at digital assets and develop a set of policies that give coherency to what the government is trying to do in this space. The State Department, Treasury Department, National Economic Council, the Council of Economic Advisors would be involved in the initiative. The White House National Security Council would also be involved, the person said, since crypto has economic implications for national security. Along those lines, the administration would instruct agencies to work on harmonizing regulations of digital assets between countries. Quote, because digital assets don't stay in one country, it's necessary to work with other countries on synchronization. I love that. There you go. You got somebody with half a brain sitting at the table here. And that's exactly right. And by the way, we have to mention Prime Minister Modi of India, who was the first to kind of jump out from a major country to say something similar, which is it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for one country in isolation to make a decision about Bitcoin, because this is a more of a global phenomenon. It's not unique to any one country. So shouldn't we all, as the UN, get together, or some collective of some other type to collaboratively debate these issues, because they don't, they're not related to any one country specifically.
That would give something for the UN to actually do.
Yeah. Yep. So the White House National Security Council will be involved. The White House won't issue recommendations. Agencies would be given 3 to 6 months to come up with proposals, and the White House would act as a policy coordinator. White House officials declined to comment. Bloomberg earlier this month reported on the White House's plan. The White House aims to bring order to the haphazard approach that the government is now using to regulate crypto. The various agencies oversee the industry, including the SEC and the CFTC, but there's no consensus on matters such as whether some tokens should be regulated as securities or how to oversee exchanges, stablecoins, and high-yield lending products. Congress has, well, by the way, there's going to be some serious boat rocking as a result of these decisions. And if somebody can, there's going to be a fun political game as usual. Watch out for Nancy Pelosi and her sharp elbows doing a little insider trading when these decisions get made in the halls of Congress before they're announced publicly or voted on. Like, this is the beauty of being, on Capitol Hill, is you get to hear the sentiment of how these votes will go down before they go down, and oh golly, can you reap a windfall if you can correctly analyze the sentiment of how these votes will go down, which any decent politician who's been there for any length of time can do. So, the Biden administration is also urging Congress to draft rules. The White House released a report on stablecoins in November, recommending that Congress act promptly to regulate the industry, blah, 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 blah. So stay tuned. So in the next 3 to 6 months, make no mistake, they're not going to get it done early in 3 months. They're going to take 6 months and whatever additional time they're allowed. So give it 9 months. And we can expect now to have the actual crypto rules of the land, for lack of a better word. Yes? Because now it's...
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Alexander.
So the interesting thing is the national security issue hasn't actually been disclosed. So I'm not really entirely sure what the national security issue is, whether it involves like Bitcoin specifically or any cryptocurrency. We don't know. Like, we haven't heard anything from that presidential working group. So this is like a giant black hole of, here, now it's a national security issue. Like, did they find something? We have no idea, but they said it's going to come out in February. So it should be a couple of weeks before we find out what they have. And I don't know if it's going to be like a full encroaching program. The problem that we've had so far is that everyone who's proposed the rules doesn't actually understand all of the rules in any area that they're proposing them. So when they've been proposed in under Treasury and in financial rules, they will discuss particular areas of crypto, but not actually discuss whether, like, the implications of modifying that rule, because other industries use those rules too. The same thing happened with the proposals for securities. So they wanted to modify a few rules, but the problem is those rules also have implications for others. Yeah, I know, honey. So those rules also have implications for other industries, and they make, like, some of the proposals have made other industries like impossible. So I'm trying to figure out exactly who they're bringing in to discuss this, or to discuss like the implications of changes in the rules and how to actually carve out what they want without changing things for other industries to make those untenable. So they don't have anybody in the working group that is based in crypto. So I'm not entirely sure where this is coming from or what it regards. It's a very strange thing. I'll do a room on it as soon as it comes out, but I have no idea where this is coming from.
Tyler, can I jump in for 2 seconds, please, for the space?
Yes, Pat, 1 second. No doubt the topic of Bitcoin as a leading alternative to the U.S. dollar for international trade must be part of that conversation that would keep certain individuals, losing a bit of sleep. So that, I think, from the U.S.'s perspective, that's the worst case scenario potentially, and by that definition, it is sort of a national security concern, I guess.
But that's not Bitcoin, though. So
And
Bitcoin doesn't have that power and has no. This is where understanding the difference between a currency and an asset is very important. And this is why you see the government, at least the Treasury, has correctly indicated stablecoins as the biggest threat to the dollar and fiat in general. But going after Bitcoin, the only thing they could say is something like, well, criminals use it. But that's the same thing as saying, like, criminals use cash, so cash is bad. It's a strange and weak argument, but the destabilizing force is what they're trying to do to counteract that, which we already knew about, is the government's CBDC, the e-dollar. And when that happened, like that's their move to counteract the influence of crypto in national reserves, right? Which is really what they want. They want to make sure that it stays in national reserves. So anyway.
Go ahead, Pat.
I just wanted to highlight this point. Sorry, Tyler. It does not declare cryptocurrency as a security threat, but they are using security as a way to assemble this team, and that team would analyze all these digital assets, analyze their potential, analyze their weaknesses, and so on and so forth. So to me, it looks like government is trying to learn more about how these digital currencies actually work and properly adopt them later on after figuring out all the potential weaknesses or strengths and so on and so forth. And they are using security measures or whatever policy or law is allowing them to allocate uh, focused, maybe use of funds or assembling a team just for that matter, because it just clearly says that they want digital assets to be analyzed properly by this team in a proper way, I guess. It's not saying that they are considering or viewing the digital assets as a security threat.
So I'm actually thinking that the listing as a national security matter is entirely designed to take it out of the hands of Congress. So this can be done as executive order,
Yes, that's
and
what. Mhm.
that is wrong in a bunch of different ways. But again, that just means there'll be rules until there's another president, because any president can, as we've seen before, overturn a prior president's executive order. That's why they're a weaker form of law, right? So it's unless it becomes, I guess, treaty level. Like there are ways to scale an executive order into something that is higher than congressional law, but it's difficult to do and it requires international collaboration, which is not infeasible or unfeasible right now, because he's like the executive branch through the agencies have been cultivating international relationships for quite a while in order to harmonize some of the regulatory structures. So it's possible that he could do that and kind of circumvent Congress. I think he'd be a one-term president if he did that, but it's possible to do that. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that the federal government has been involved in blockchain. Like there are a couple that are actually nodes on blockchains, so they've been involved in blockchain and understanding exactly how transactions work for years, for at least 7 years. They've been involved already. So I imagine there's very little that they don't know about it already in terms of the way that things get transferred and the security issues underneath it. So the only thing I can think is that they're trying to just circumvent Congress.
Be that as it may, yes, thank you, Tyler. It sounds like what you've suggested, Tyler, and Alexandra earlier on was saying, pointed to me anyway, that what is not advantageous at the moment with this development is that there is a lack of participation, and this is what Alexandra, I think, highlighted, and the way of governing this quote unquote new area of financing and economics. And from all the discussions I've heard on Clubhouse and other areas on Twitter, there's a lot of talk about how wonderful Bitcoin and crypto and the blockchains and all of that are, but have the voices come together to create an industry of it, an area of influence to actually make sure that the potential and the opportunities, as well as the downsides, get noted by the powers that be. Yeah, Biden can go off and make an executive decision. That'd be great, and turn it around next time around by another person. However, it still comes down to the fact that as individuals, we should be participating in this. And maybe that's what Alexandra and others on this in this room can actually push forward and get more people involved in actually getting their congressmen, their senators, or even themselves lobbying Capitol Hill as to what happens next and how, because it is important. There has to be a global sort of level of coordination of all this because it influences everybody's lives and it will impact all our futures. So this is something that you both highlighted, and I think I hope that you all work together on this because it needs to. I'm not a Bitcoin person. You all are. You're all into that technology, so go for it.
Okay.
Real question, is it a national security matter or is it a central security matter? And I've raised this to Alexandra before, and if anyone has some information to add, ISO 20022. I feel like that's their way of going, oh no, this blockchain thing is getting really popular. How do we get on in on this action?
Okay. Next article, after customer backlash, Google says users of their legacy free G Suite accounts, myself included, will be able to migrate data for free. Yeah, but I think we already knew that. I think they're just reminding people who are bitching and complaining that Google's now going to rug pull everybody and start charging for those of us who signed up for early Gmail accounts with company domain names, which we've had for free for over a decade. They're now going to start charging for, and that sucks. But they're reminding people that you can migrate your data for free. Yeah, well, I think that was always the case. But I think they're saying, hey, you're free to leave anytime, and nothing's stopping you. You can opt out anyway. They're not holding anybody hostage. Is sort of what they're reminding everybody, so they can avoid some bad press that, oh my God, you're charging me now. Yeah, well, you can take all of your data and everything with you elsewhere if you don't. By the way, everyone else is charging you too. Good luck finding anyone else who's offering it for free, by the way. So the next one is that Google is going to invest $700 million in India's second largest telecom operator for a 1.28% stake. And an additional $300 million will go to multi-year agreements. So in total, they're investing $1 billion in India's second biggest telecom operator. That's an interesting move. Could have interesting ramifications that are hard to anticipate. The next is from the Washington Post, that the Center for Countering Digital Hate. It's from the Washington Post, that Substack, and let's pause there to remind people what Substack is. You can think of it like, Blogger. What came after Blogger? Oh, Medium from Evan Williams. And then we ended up with Substack as kind of the most kind of blogging platform du jour. And people are making money on Substack by quote unquote blogging on Substack or having newsletters on Substack. Even a lot of professional journalists are setting up shop on Substack, and they're being paid. And because Substack is splitting revenue with people on Substack, and that's great. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Substack's biggest investor is Andreessen Horowitz, which is also the biggest backer of some app called Clubby Hoosey, some social audio app that you may or may not be familiar with, especially if you're listening to tech news around the world. So, what's interesting about this article from the Washington Post, they're pointing out the fact that Substack defends hosting writers. Substack makes, here's the headline, Substack makes at least $2.5 million per year. My God, you can almost buy a salad in Oslo for that amount of money. $2.5 million a year via anti-vaccine posts. Oh, dear God. Well, yeah, there's people who are anti-vaxxers who are on Substack. And Substack splits ad revenue with people based on traffic. So, yeah, they've calculated, they've done some napkin math. They were hanging out at El Pollo Loco and did a little napkin math, and they figured out they are making at least $2.5 million a year based on the traffic via anti-vaccine posts. How dare they? Substack defends their position about hosting writers with whom we strongly disagree, meaning we are a platform. We are not in the business of silencing people we disagree with. We allow people to have opinions that we strongly disagree with because we're a platform, which it might be challenging for anyone who went to college after, I don't know, 2015. And I'll let Francine Hardaway jump in on this because this is kind of one of the turning social issues of, the 2020s, which is should platforms be policing themselves based on moral and ethical grounds, or should they act like in the old school ways as platforms? And Substack is taking kind of an old school approach, and I think it's in part due to Andreessen Horowitz being their investor, who very much wants them to be that way. And I imagine Clubhouse is quite hands-offish to a degree, because for similar reasons that Andreessen Horowitz says, hey, if you're a platform like Clubhouse or Substack, it isn't really your business to be policing who's saying what. And Twitter got itself quite wrapped up in a whole bunch of stuff when during COVID, when at some points some things that seemed to be obvious turned out to be wrong, and had to kind of explain why they were silencing Kyle Rittenhouse supporters, for one. Pre-trial, people who said Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent were being suspended on Twitter. Well, turns out a jury of his peers said that he was. So what happened to those people who were suspended for saying that? And now you know why it really shouldn't be your business as a platform to be policing what people are saying on your platform, whether or not you disagree with them violently. And that's what Substack's trying to say, is we're going to take a traditional hands-off approach to these issues. Unless they're breaking laws, then of course we will act. But our platform shouldn't be in the business of having policies that are based on moral or ethical issues other than enforcing the laws applicable in those lands. So anyway, you are going to get things like the Washington Post, who are editorialized, who do take great stances on things, and more becoming more and more insular and navel gazing and myopic on all of these issues, and even some would even say a bit extreme in the case in the New York Times example. And they don't like the New York Times, who has become quite extreme in their worldview, is having a hard time tolerating things like Substack, which are so open and allowing for voices that they disagree with, because the New York Times is not a platform. You can't go on there and say whatever you want, and nor can you even work there and say what you want. As who's our friend Ken, who used to work there? Gabby, no, what's her name? Jesus, who's, by the way, now on Substack.
So, but the problem is two things with this, right? So, Section 230, which is the platform exception, it was not meant to supersede public health, right? So that's one issue, is that if people are put in imminent harm because of actions that are directly derived from something that's on a platform, then that supersedes any protection that you have. So if there's someone saying, go shoot people at this school right now, go shoot them, they're enemies, go shoot them. If someone is saying that right now on a platform, and that platform doesn't cut them off, then that the platform is liable for the distribution of that message that is incendiary.
Yes.
There's an argument that there's the same thing, though, for people who are publicizing anything that prevents essentially the containment and control of a national health issue or an international health issue. But the other thing is that it's always being applied inconsistently. So I sent an article to you on Twitter, which is that that Spotify, which took off Neil Young, or no, they didn't take off Neil Young. They said they're going to keep Joe Rogan, and so Neil Young left. But it turns out that Spotify has actually removed 20,000 other podcasters for misinformation on COVID, but not Joe Rogan. So really the issue is, are you making money for me, right? If you are making money for me, then you get to stay. But if you are not, then you must leave. That's nothing about policing what people say. It's basically kicking off underperforming people.
Mm-hmm. Wait a minute. They've actually removed over 40 of Joe Rogan's podcasts. They didn't remove this one. So that's one thing. And actually, Section 230 isn't blanket immunity. There are some exceptions to it, but there's not a specific public health exception to it. And also I'm just joining now, so I didn't hear a lot of this, but it's the background in the it's not a specific public health exemption. There are still some duties under 230. It's not a blanket exception. And again, if we're going back to vaxing and not vaxing or that stuff, there's too many different opinions out there or disagreements on what straight science is. And so that's why this Joe Rogan isn't something that had to be removed or violate Section 230. And again, I kind of heard earlier, Tyler, you're talking about the New York Times. The New York Times wouldn't, as you said, be a platform, right? That's a news medium.
Right. Well, I love your point about the fact that Spotify has removed some of Joe's episodes, and it remains to be seen if they might remove this particular recent episode with, I forget who the guest was, that caused so many people or caused a lot of doctors to write a letter or whatnot. And that would have been very interesting to see. And maybe our friend Neil Young anticipated that they would remove that one episode, as you've said. I think they've removed many episodes in the past, and maybe that was an interesting compromise, is they don't have to remove all 1,000 Joe Rogan episodes. That would be an idiotic response to people upset about one of 1,000 episodes. So what if they had removed that one episode? And what if they still do, by the way? Because the episodes that Spotify has removed, they didn't remove them in a knee-jerk reaction to a flash mob. They removed them kind of subtle, kind of down the road a bit. And remains to be seen. It's a very interesting point. So the next article, shall we, from MIT, that OpenAI says that Instruct GPT, its new GPT-3 version, is better at following instructions, producing less offensive language, less misinformation, and fewer mistakes. OpenAI has trained its flagship language model to follow instructions, making it spit out less unwanted text, but there's still a way to go. Yeah, obviously, until it's smarter than you.
I can't wait till it generates contracts that work. I was looking at it earlier this week, Tyler, and I was trying to find a model there that actually made sense for attorneys. I can't wait till that thing starts working on contracts. I'm all for that part of robots.
Right. Sam Altman, who plays a significant role at OpenAI, it says, we trained Instruct GPT to follow instructions, making it more aligned with human intent. Now in our APIs, it's safer and more functional than previous models. See example about moon landing, one small step for alignment research. Okay, that's great. Well, yeah, this is the beauty of these technologies, that they're going to continue to improve while we sleep. So it's just a question of when. It's just a matter of time before these things surpass even the best humans. And by the way, OpenAI already has, for example, music production, where they have an OpenAI algorithm that creates songs and publishes them to SoundCloud account for OpenAI. And the songs that it's creating are much better than you would write, honestly, or you would record. If I gave you a whole bunch of recording equipment and musical equipment, you would not produce content as good as this algorithm is doing, unless you've been writing songs and practicing instruments for, I don't know, decades. So it's already better than 99.9% of the population. The question is, when will it actually beat the people who have been doing it their whole lives and are in the Billboard, top 100? Well, that's an interesting question, and but no doubt it will happen at some point. The question is when. So the next article is from Casey Newton, who's a tech blogger, and the story says 3 things Web3 should fix this year in 2022: make crypto transactions safe and reliable, make blockchains efficient, and develop tech for mitigating harassment and abuse. Okay, fair enough. Next is from The Verge. It says, Will Cathart at WhatsApp says that WhatsApp has no plans for RCS, which is a kind of SMS alternative chat protocol, as Facebook, and that's kind of unfortunate because Google, by the way, is a very big fans of RCS, and all of the Google chat apps all use RCS. And wouldn't it be nice if all of these chat platforms like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp and all of these used RCS, then we could interchange them all. Oh my God, wouldn't that be amazing? Kind of like email, if we all operated on one protocol like that. Anyway, WhatsApp has no plans to use RCS like Google's doing with all of their chat projects. And Facebook-owned messaging app wants to be as popular in the US as it is everywhere else. Will be a big marketing push work. Anyway, so WhatsApp isn't going to join RCS. That's the headline. Next is that the Indian industrial B2B marketplace called Moglix raises $250 million at $2.6 billion valuation. And so their valuation has gone up from $1 billion to $2.6 billion in the past 8 months. There you go. Next up, from Bloomberg, the founder of a company called Autonomy loses $5 billion court battle with Hewlett-Packard over false accounting. The UK government will now decide whether to extradite him to the United States. Ouch. Then from CNBC, tech startups raised a record $621 billion in VC funding globally in 2021, more than double in 2020, and the number of unicorns rose 69% to 959. So that, by the way, any city in the world would have been ecstatic to have the amount of money invested in their city to grow by 30% in 1 year. Normally, those numbers go up 10 to 15 to 20% is a nice turnout for a city like Stockholm or London or Berlin or any, even Los Angeles, New York, Seattle, all the tech hubs globally, Tel Aviv, you name them. If your city is growing, getting more VC investment at the tune of 10 to 20%, you're very happy. And that was the norm over the past 10 years. And here we go in 2021 during COVID, and the global average was 100% growth. Holy shit. That's a huge turnout for startups. What that means is there has never been more money going into startups. That means there's never been easier to fundraise as a startup because there's more money. That means there's never been a better time to be a startup founder because the money's never been easier to raise. Is what that means for you, sitting at home with your crazy idea, for a Uber for cats or whatever you're thinking about. So the next one, this is from Reuters, that the FCC revokes China Unicom's authorization to operate in the United States. So this is a Chinese telecom, this was granted 20 years ago, and the reason is citing national security concerns. Unicom can still offer data center services, but they're not allowed to operate as a mobile provider in the U.S. no more. Gee, I wonder why. Well, it's because they found out they were sending all that data back to China, and they're using it to do corporate espionage. This is the same old game. What is it, Wednesday? No, it's Friday. Oh, geez, China's doing corporate espionage on something. Yesterday, the headline was they were doing it on the app that all the Olympians have to install as part of being an Olympian in the Beijing 2022 games. Is everyone all has to install this app? And the headline from Wired and others coming out now is that, and Data, who joins us regularly, was claiming he had found evidence that the app that the athletes have to install leaves the microphone on all the time, and all that data is being recording and sending all that data to Chinese servers, ostensibly so they can hear what you're strategizing for your bobsled team or what have you. So I know you're shocked and surprised. Me too. So anyway, yeah, they don't want China operating a telecom company in the U.S. For similar reasons. So the next one from CNBC. Google Cloud Division has formed a group to build business around blockchain applications and plans to hire a slew of blockchain experts. Alphabet's Google Cloud Division is forming a team to win blockchain business after making a concerted effort in retail and other industries. So they're just chasing the market and where the demand is. And there's a whole bunch of demand for blockchain cloud. So
yeah, but Tyler, also some of them, who was it? I think it was IBM Cloud or one of those that they've folded those or put them on pause, I guess, because there wasn't enough rollout and pickup. It'll be interesting to follow because you are gonna end up using these, right? All the big companies are using them, like for supply chain and such. It's a great use case, but it's getting a rocky start.
Mm-hmm. So, what else? We got a whole bunch of funding announcements, and I think we can get into the tweets. Are we ready for the tweets? Robinhood did their quarter announcement of 14% year over year. And while that might be good for somebody like Apple as the biggest company in the world, that's really, really, really bad for a really, really small company like Robinhood to only grow 14%. They should be growing 100% year over year when you're that small. So revenue of 1.8 billion, a net loss of 423, monthly active users up 48% year over year, stock down 10% as a result of their quarterly earnings, which, by the way, it's been a dark year since the Robinhood IPO. They desperately need to find a turnaround. That stock chart is not fun to look at. The next one.
Wait, before you move on, just Robinhood also is facing legal action. So part of it is they were doing so much of the trading that because people aren't there's not as much churn there. That's one of the big reasons why their earnings are down. But the other thing is right now, which isn't even reflected in their financials, there's one big case against them, and then there are, I think, 7 other states that are preparing cases in similar fashion, and even Gary Gensler's actually named them in a speech saying these order books are going away. So and then the two exchanges that they do all their transactions with, so like they collect all of the orders and then pass them along to the exchanges. These 2 exchanges are actually ones I have tried to get regulated since I was literally at the SEC and tried to create a marketplace with blockchain to exclude them, but they're grandfathered in, and blockchain, the technology isn't there yet to actually do that. But now they're under investigation as well because of how much self-dealing they do. They basically make a lot of gains with no risk because they can see exactly what is happening on both sides, and so they basically just make unfettered money. So anyway, so there's a lot of problems in that particular industry, and for those who are trying to open up order books, please, you probably shouldn't.
Okay. Are we ready for the tweets that we've all been patiently waiting for? I think we are. Here we go. Let's jump into the tweets. So right off the top, from Dr. Fran, found a really interesting one recently from an hour ago. Breaking news at Sirius Satellite Radio, or what's now called Sirius XM, announces that it is countering Spotify's decision to remove Neil Young's music by bringing back and promoting its Neil Young radio station on its massive streaming platform. And interesting marketing move there by the Sirius XM team to back Neil Young. Evan found a really interesting video from Thailand of a scooter battery swap innovation that Thailand is testing out, where you have an electric scooter that you're zooming around town, which, by the way, Thailand is like 80% electric gas scooter. I mean, scooters is 80% of mobility. Little 125cc motorbikes are wildly popular in Southeast Asia, as anyone who's ever been here knows well. And now they're starting to see a lot of electric ones. The problem is what to do about the batteries, and now they've got these battery swapping stations. You can think of them as the modern replacement of a gas station, where you pull up, you open the seat on your bike, you pull out your lithium battery, and swap it for a new one, and pay a little bit for a freshly charged battery and slap it in, and off you go. Faster than it would take you to put the gas in, by the way, and probably costs less as well. So it's a very interesting. I just tweeted that out. Thank you for Evan to that one. So I just retweeted Evan's tweet to the Tech News Twitter account. Yes.
I was going to add, Tyler, that there's actually a startup in Rwanda doing the same thing called Ampersand. And that started about 2 or 3 years ago. I've actually visited a startup in Rwanda. Rwanda was the first country in Africa to mandate, they call them bodas in East Africa, to mandate electrical bicycles by 2025. Obviously, Kagame, being a very progressive leader, he also brought in a drone startup called Zipline. You may have heard of that one. And so, so they actually are doing the same thing. And I took a ride, and it was very pleasant. I went to see the startup, and literally it's so fast, and it saves a lot of obviously gas in East Africa. That's a huge expense for and a massive income earner for a lot of people in East Africa. Yeah, so this is also happening in Africa.
It seems like it might be a really ideal solution for folks. When you see the video, you'll know what I mean.
Yeah. So, one of the things that comes up is like you think about, can they charge it themselves? Do they build tamper-proof tech so that you don't just walk off and charge it yourself? That's kind of one of the concerns I've seen in this space. But it's much easier just to kind of go back to the station, swap your battery, and earn more money from picking up passengers.
Yeah. By the way, this would be an interesting solution for the little micro mobility scooters, and it could potentially, someday, one could hope, it might be a suitable model for phone charging. By the way, as we need phones that are much stronger to power our AR headsets, ostensibly. That you could walk into every store on the planet would have a stash of standard phone batteries that you could just take yours out and get the freshly charged one for, I don't know.
Good. Apple won't even give right to repair, Tyler. There's no way they're gonna
Biden just passed something this week that is going to force Apple to do that. So I wouldn't rule it out eventually. I'm talking 5-10 years from now, but it would be by the way, the EU's forcing Apple to do USB-C on iPhones. So I don't think it's inconceivable that we might get there.
No, totally agree, and totally agree that's that actually, as you note, and also the VR AR headsets, if those things are going to use a lot of juice, as you note, that is a great solution.
Yeah, but what an interesting way to solve it. Because, by the way, the businesses think, convenience stores and cafes, they're going to love the fact that you're going to need to be coming in because you're going to do, an impulse blood sugar rush. You're going to need to buy a candy bar or whatever, a latte or whatever. So it's an interesting move.
And also reduce battery size. Like I know right now with the e-bikes, that's a big issue because the batteries are so big.
That too. Yeah. Okay, next up is a tweet from Jeff G. that China quietly locks down area near Beijing as Olympic date nears, leaving 1.2 million people locked in. Jeff G., thank you for that. It says, Chinese authorities locked down an area neighboring Beijing this week following a handful of reported coronavirus cases. Makes sense. And I said this would all happen as we get closer to the Olympics. They're going to do everything they can to keep Omicron out of Beijing during the Olympics so that they can keep that rolling and not have to, it's been a wild race. It's like Omicron's literally trying to race towards Beijing, and they're trying to do everything they can to prevent it from getting there because viruses travel geographically. I know that's a hard reality for people to swallow, but you can stop the spread of the virus by controlling people's ability to move, by the way, as we did in Thailand, and it worked incredibly well, I have to say. So, the next one is...
Tyler?
Yes.
Just going back on the scooter thing, this is also like the only model that they can go to some countries and be able to offer, this type of mobility, because it's kind of like the shaver, the how can I say, the blades and the shave, because like you can offer a very, very cheap scooter and that can only work on this service, and being able to, pay in just by charging it is the only way you can introduce that.
Right. So Jeff G has the next one from The Verge that hackers have stolen $80 million in cryptocurrency from the Qubit DeFi platform. The exploit let them deposit 0 ETH and withdraw 80 million. That's a few lattes right there. And the next one, also from Jeff G from South China Morning Post, that Chinese...
Oh, wait. Which app was that? Because I might need to start an account there.
It was Qubit, spelled Qubit.
Okay, cool.
Next is Chinese team develops 6G technology for hypersonic weapons. Tianjin, I guess university, because that's one of the major tech universities. The Tianjin team says it has solved some communication blackout problems that occur at 5 times the speed of sound. Oh, well, now there's an interesting use case for 6G. We can launch hypersonic missiles. Can't do that with 5G, can you? So the next one is from nobody in particular, that Facebook Messenger's end-to-end encrypted chats and calls are available to now everybody worldwide. You can flick a switch and turn on privacy-protecting encryption without losing features. Messenger has now added end-to-end encryption. Well, it started back in 2016 when it was still called Facebook Messenger and when Meta was still called Facebook. Now, many things have changed, but the optimum feature is fully rolled out now to everyone with toggles to encrypt text messages as well as group chats and calls. Facebook has discussed switching to end-to-end as a default, but that may not happen until next year at the earliest, as some regulators claim this would harm public safety. Yeah, well, they don't want to have to use their version of Pegasus on your phone to find out what you're saying. They would prefer you not have end-to-end encryption. And this is, as I predicted, in 2021, going to be one of the hot topics of 2022, is governments realizing this kind of friction between big governments and big tech on the issue of end-to-end encryption and whether or not people should have it. And the end result is going to be governments are going to realize it's in their own interests that you think you have end-to-end encryption, but they have a backdoor. I know that sounds impossible that you could have end-to-end encryption and a backdoor, but it's not. So that's likely to be the end result of all of this, is you'll be lulled into thinking you have full encryption, and there will be an interesting sort of carve out that will allow them to get everything that they need, and they'll be very happy about that, and you think you will be too. So the next one is from Evan about why Walmart is investing in vertical farming. Walmart is seeking to make its food supply more resilient and expand offering for customers. Did you happen to read this one, Evan, about Walmart's interests in vertical farming? Mr. Evan Kirstel. Paging Evan. We will come back to you, Evan. Earth to Evan. Okay, we'll come back. Next is also from Evan that Robinhood stock falls 11% due to the quarter earnings report. We covered that. And Elon Musk tweeted out in the past 24 hours that Canadian truckers rule. Kind of a big controversial announcement there, but the reply to his own tweet is perhaps even far more interesting, that CB radios are free from government media control. And that is a really interesting note to contemplate, that CBs do allow people to communicate outside of the controls of governments. And Clinton, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been chomping at the bit to jump in on this one because I had a strong suspicion, Tyler, that you would bring this up. So a couple of things. So first of all, in regards to Elon's tweet on this topic, I find it highly amusing and ironic that, and this is not a criticism directed towards Elon, by the way, that a man who has made it his life goal to introduce fully autonomous self-driving vehicles, including tractor trailers, by the way, and is intending to make this a reality, a legitimate wide-scale reality at some point within the next 3 to 5 years, that the entire trucking community in Canada is taking him on as their hero because he is tweeting out support against the notion of a vaccine mandate that truckers require from Canada in order to enter the United States, and for American drivers to enter Canada. And so I find that quite amusing.
Yeah. Okay. Next up is from Valerie. She found a tweet that I'm retweeting that the Environmental Protection Agency is leading the White House effort to secure the water sector against cyber attacks. That's worth reading, because if and only if you drink water. Or do we have any water drinkers here in Tech News Around the World? Just a quick show of hands. If you're a water drinker, anybody?
No,
Yes, I drink
drinking
water all the
water
time.
is easier to
JT,
count.
really? All the time?
I only drink water.
Like
I
every
don't
day?
drink anything else every day. Just
Wow,
water, nothing else.
amazing. So, me too, by the way. And apparently, there's a lot of us who water drinkers. We're like the new vegan.
Who don't?
The EPA leading White House
Who
effort
runs on fuel?
to secure the water sector against cyber attacks. This is the third in a series of 100-day sprints to shore up industrial control systems using critical infrastructures. Wow, interesting. So all of a sudden, there's this big push to secure critical infrastructure and things like water. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why there's all of a sudden this big rush to secure our water supply. Geez, this is a real conundrum, a real puzzle. Can somebody help?
They're literally, hold on, this is Elle. They're actually reporting that. I mean, they've been doing that.
I
I
was
mean, they've
hoping
been
for the
talking about
music.
it. I don't, why is this news?
Hold on. The Biden administration, it says this is the third in a series of 100-day sprints. So they've done two previous 100-day sprints to shore up industrial control systems used in critical infrastructure. The Biden administration is extending an initiative to improve the cybersecurity of industrial control systems to the water sector. It will be executed by the Environmental Protection Agency in collaboration with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and private sector leaders. Quote, a cyber attack on a water system could be carried out to manipulate treatment processes to produce unsafe water, also to damage water system infrastructure, or even to stop the flow of water to consumers. Senior administration officials said on a call with reporters on Wednesday. Industrial control systems that manage physical processes at heavy-duty facilities have become increasingly digitized and vulnerable to malicious attackers, as demonstrated by an attack last February on water treatment plant in Florida. Oh, gee, I wonder if there's going to be crazy bald-headed guys jumping in here warning us to control our own water supplies because they're hackable now.
I mean,
Tyler, yeah,
this has been I don't understand how this is news for, I mean, ever
right.
since the Homeland Security was created, along with other agencies had to roll up under it. This has been an ongoing thing with them. Unfortunately, ensuring that all of our CKRs or CIKRs are protected. Most of them are on closed networks. They're not networked in, so it's not like they can gain access. There are a few that actually are have outside networks, but most of them are closed networks to ensure that someone from the outside can't hack. And if they do get hacked, it's usually someone from the inside attaching something directly to the network. The big issue is a lot of our critical infrastructure isn't necessarily owned by the federal government. It's owned by private entities. So what they need to do is try to get those private entities are supposed to be following certain cybersecurity rules and supposed to be following certain regulations. So this is a decision whether the federal government is going to go in and do maybe a complete takeover, which I doubt that ever happens because that's way too much work. So, or do something with the states. But this has been ongoing for a while, so I don't understand why they made this like news.
Okay.
No, to
Well,
Elle's point, the news is that this is news. And so again, you have to look at what's the story behind it or what's the intent behind them. To Elle's comment, it's they're trying to shift budget towards more of this, right? So this is like the different departments, different fiefdoms pulling for budget. I remember how much budget after 9/11 Homeland Security got for and TSA got, right? So these guys are publicizing this, and you saw a lot of publicity last fall, right before Biden announced the his new cyber department and initiatives. And as Elle is saying, it's more, they've been rolling out additional requirements on all of these sub entities, private entities, and on the anyone doing business with or under the federal government. As Elle, they're not going to take it over directly. They're just trying to roll out standards. And again, that's to your point. It's the news is that it is, why are they pushing this news out now? It's budget and probably to try and comfort people that we're actually addressing this stuff.
Yeah, that makes more sense because I'm like, this has been ongoing for the longest time. So yeah, saying that they're publicizing it for money, that makes more sense.
Okay. So the article continues. It says that over the next 100 days, officials said the initiative would focus on the water sector, starting first with systems serving the high population areas that would suffer the largest consequences from a cyber attack. Well, gee, I wonder if because those would be the ones to be most likely targeted, like LA, New York, Chicago, what have you. The two primary, because by the way, nothing would cause more panic more quickly. I know the whole running out of toilet paper thing was a grave concern for a lot of people. Imagine there was a rush on water, for example. Imagine the water stops. You can only last about 3 days without water, by the way. So the two primary goals of the effort will be for operators to adapt technology to provide early detection of cybersecurity incidents and to facilitate the sharing of cyber threat data with the government. Yes, because they want to know if you are being cyber attacked, so that it's a heads up that somebody's trying to meddle with our water supplies, because then they can share that information. Because when cyber attackers attack, they're not attacking spearfishing individually. They're going to move on to the next one until they find somebody with weak security, and then so it is very helpful.
No, that's exactly right, Tyler. So that's actually a big issue in the private sector, and part of this, they're required to report breaches. But again, leave it to the attorneys. That stuff can be interpreted. But again, the reason they're doing that is because a lot of these guys are going to be using the same tactics, whether on infrastructure or on private companies. And that if they're attacking one bank, they're going to go for all of them. And so if you would report it, they could warn the other banks of the method or the malware that's coming and try to get their hands around it more. But a lot of companies, again, there's a lot of reasons you don't want to report these things for liability reasons, or maybe you just are head down trying to address it. But yeah, good point there.
Yeah, but it is what is it. I like your point, Jennifer, that the news is the fact that they're making a fuss out of this because it is a very real threat that people need to be aware about, and I would love nothing more than for everybody to take this very seriously, because when you do, you realize that the people and the agencies behind these things are the same people making the decisions about COVID. So if you feel that your government has not demonstrated absolute positive abilities in managing COVID, you might want to think about how they manage your water supply that you're dependent on. And
true dat, Tyler, true dat.
Right. So,
yeah. Do I have confidence in how they've handled it? Good question.
It's a nice rehearsal to find out how competent your government is. So, take care of your own water, especially if you happen to live in an incompetent government. That would be my advice. So it's not.
They haven't fixed the water at Flint yet. Flint's still drinking bottled water.
Oh my God! Don't get me started. Don't get me started. So the next one's from Dr. Fran. She found a tweet from somebody 14 hours ago saying, "Breaking: Spotify is no longer letting people cancel subscriptions." And Dr. Fran tweeted saying, "Anyone know if this is true?" The person who tweeted it has been retweeted 7,000 times. And he says that their customer service system is completely overwhelmed. People asking to cancel are being told they cannot. Presumably, Spotify will allow cancellations again at some point once their system is not so flooded. Share any interactions you're having with them.
Oh, that's awesome. So Neil Young is catalyzing the vote with your feet movement.
Can't you
Oh
just
my
go into your own
God.
phone and cancel it? I mean, that doesn't make sense. It's automated, right? Or that you just go in and
I
cancel
tried
it.
to delete the app and it wouldn't let me.
Really?
Well, it's not just
the other
deleting
thing,
it though.
Barry
You got to
Manilow,
cancel. Yeah.
Barry Manilow has left also. Not that Neil Young's my hero. Barry Manilow, not so much.
The Barry Manilow.
That's what I heard. I
Well,
have no
here's the problem.
confirmation.
I don't know if Barry Manilow can leave because Barry Manilow just sold his catalog for like hundreds of millions of dollars to investors. Okay, so how does he do that? Okay, I haven't seen that story, and I'm going to actually check that out because
Please do that for me, Ken, because I bank on you to know this stuff. Okay.
yeah, particularly. I mean, I'm the era that grew up in the Barry Manilow era, so I'm very familiar. So I didn't see that news, but I'm going to look it up. Thanks.
Yeah, Ken, look and see if he's trying to pull his music or just making a statement that he's terminating his individual account.
He sold his music. He doesn't even he
Right.
doesn't own it.
No,
He
that's
just
right.
sold
But
it for
what's
like
the news story? But so he wouldn't have the ability to pull his music, but see what the actual story
Nice
behind
touch,
like all
Tyler.
yeah, right.
the
Okay.
headlines
Yeah.
is.
Who's
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
to be next? Michael Bolton? When will this madness stop?
Well, here's my take.
Oh,
It's possible he just wants to be all by himself. Sorry, that.
I was gonna I
That
was
was
gonna say,
hilarious.
I got it.
oh Mandy, can you take all my music from Spotify? Right?
Go for it, David.
It's the "All by Myself" song by Barry Manilow. I was playing there in the background. Um, he wants to be all by himself, and yeah, who knows?
But no, hang on a second. He's not by himself. No, no, no. It's a great tongue in cheek or whatever you know. But that's kind of interesting, right? Maybe there's going to be a percolation of voting with your pocketbook. I mean, that's been, with the last, I don't know, couple decades when social movements try to get started against corporate power, it's like, oh, okay, use your pocketbook, and those are really tough to do. So we'll have to kind of watch this, see if it gets some traction.
Okay. Oh, by the way, interesting potential move by Mr. Neil Young that if he knew he could influence Spotify's stock price by that little move and shorted Spotify before his announcement, that could have been a really interesting form of sort of insider trading, which may or may not be illegal in that case. That would be interesting to hear Ken's take on that. But yeah, I'm certainly
You
Metallica.
want my take on what, by the way?
If Neil Young
No, he's
knew,
not.
if he
He's
did
not an
that,
insider to Spotify. No, I'd say no.
no, I'm saying if you don't have to be. He could short sell Spotify the day before he did that PR stunt. If he was confident he could get enough people to cancel it.
That might be probably considered market manipulation. So
Right.
I don't know if he would do that. By the way, there's a story out from um, a whatever internet thing called Showbiz something, saying that the Barry Manilow rumor is not true for the exact reasons that I just said, because he sold this catalog.
Ah.
Yeah, I just the person who tweeted it out deleted the tweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up,
So clickbait, victims of clickbait.
yeah. Well, the whole story is all of the crazy amount of misinformation around
And,
that.
and I should point out, by the way, that's been going on a lot in the last 2 years because there's a lot of money, and I don't know whether the valuations are really high. They're all selling their catalogs because they're getting paid fortunes. Okay, by essentially private equity or hedge funds or whatever, mostly private equity, to sell catalogs. I mean, you can. There's a whole list of older singers who've been able to sell their catalogs. Who
Yeah.
controlled it for like fortunes.
Quincy Jones sold his company to the same company as well. So that's the Thriller catalog, all of that stuff. So it's crazy.
Wasn't it $100 million that Michael Jackson originally paid for the Beatles catalog, and people called him crazy?
Yeah. And
So,
then was it Paul McCartney got pissed off that he did that?
yeah, well, it's Paul who taught him the benefits of doing it. That's why, and Paul was bidding for his own catalog, and Michael outbid him after Paul taught him the importance of owning your own catalog. And so, anyway, the next, while we're on the topic, from the Times UK, the headline says streaming platforms like Spotify to be investigated for holding too much power. Britain's music streaming market is to be investigated by the competition watchdog to determine whether major record labels and companies. Wait. Let's read this together. Britain's music streaming market is to be investigated by the competition watchdog to determine whether major record labels and companies such as Spotify hold excessive power. The Competition Markets Authority said that it wanted to investigate whether the streaming market was working well for music lovers and artists and to ensure that they were getting a fair deal. Whether you're into Bowie, Beethoven, or Beyonce, most of us now choose to stream our favorite music, says the chief executive at the CMA. A vibrant and competitive music streaming market not only serves the interests of fans and creators, but also helps support the diverse and dynamic sector, which is of significant cultural and economic value to the UK. The regulator has been asked to launch the study after a sharply critical report by a group of MPs last year said that the streaming market needed a complete overhaul to prevent it jeopardizing the future of the British music industry. The report from the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Selective Committee said that more needed to be done to ensure that performers, songwriters, and composers received a fair share of earnings from their music being streamed. It warned that pitiful returns from the current system were affecting the entire creative ecosystem, and that some successful musicians were seeing meager returns from their work. Streaming music through platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and YouTube made up 83% of music consumption in the UK last year, according to the British Phonographic Industry. The Record Labels Association, the Entertainment Retailers Association, estimates that spending on music streaming reached 1.3 billion euros in the UK last year, compared with 150 million spent on CDs and 135 million on vinyl albums, so 10x. The market is dominated by YouTube, which operates primarily as an advertising-funded model, followed by Spotify, Amazon, and Apple. The later three charge £10 per month, £10 per month, for unlimited access to millions of songs that they have licensed for the use from record labels, which have rights over performances and songs. Songs were streamed more than 147 billion times in Britain through the all-you-can-eat subscription services last year alone. The CMA said that it would be looking at the music streaming market across the entire chain, from creator to consumer, analyzing the deals artists make with record labels through to the music streaming services offered to consumers. It added that it would be paying particular attention to the potential influence and power that a select number of streaming services and record labels hold. The regulator referred to the DCMS Select Committee's report, which is the one doing the sports and whatever, that agency that oversees culture or whatever. And where did it go? Which had expressed concern about the role of the three largest global music companies, Sony, Universal, and Warner, which hold a combined 75% share of UK recording market, and their relationship with the streaming services such as Spotify. The committee had said that revenue-sharing deals between these labels and streaming platforms were often covered by non-disclosure agreements, leading to a lack of transparency for artists. The report also questioned whether the popular editorial playlists that companies such as Spotify create for users were favored towards musicians signed to these big labels. Gee, I wonder. The CMA, the Central Market or the Market Authority, said that it would investigate these issues and would also assess whether any lack of competition between music companies could affect the musicians, singers, and songwriters whose interests are intertwined with those of music lovers. It said that if it found problems with the industry, it would consider what action might be necessary. As we examine this complex market, our thinking and conclusions will be guided by the evidence we receive. In response to the CMA's announcement of the investigation, the government said that the music streaming was a complex area and that it was vitally important that any action by the government be led by robust evidence. Great. Fantastic.
You know what's missing from that whole story, Tyler? No. That it was consumers that almost single-handedly, in fact, and to some extent have damaged the music market, because they were all stealing the music before Steve Jobs figured out what level of price that they'd be willing to pay, okay, and not steal it. Okay, so if you didn't have the streaming services, because of the internet, if you didn't have the streaming services at this point, it would be all piracy, and nobody would make any money. And they don't mention that. They
Isn't the
forget.
market just a market though? Like, if that is what people are willing to pay, then that's just what people are willing to pay, and you can't overprice them out of whatever they're willing to pay.
I,
That's how
I I
it works,
understand
right?
that, but the article, the whole implication from the British government is somehow this is like this the big bad music companies, the big bad streaming companies. I mean, what was going on in the early days of the internet in the 1990s was and there were no streaming services then. There wasn't even a business model. Okay, is that people were taking CDs and ripping the we call ripping. I don't even know if younger people know that term anymore. But ripping the music off the CDs and then sending it through the internet or posting it, and so all the music was basically just getting stolen, and nobody was getting anything in terms of money. So and that was the consumer doing that. In fact, the RIAA, which is the music association that represents the labels here in the United States, they actually ended up. I didn't agree with this because I thought the optics looked really bad. But they sued certain teenagers and their parents, for stealing for stealing music.
They still
You
do,
know,
or they still do online.
I want to
Yeah.
take another angle to this though, because
yeah.
what
So
I read, yeah.
go ahead. I'm done.
Okay, cool, thank you. I wanted to like the other angle of the '90s, right, which is when people were doing mixtapes for free because it was hard to get a record deal, or either they would take all of the ownership and you wouldn't have anything for the next 50 years. So people in hip hop would create mixtapes, build the buzz themselves, and then come to the record labels with leverage. And even yet, still, the record labels were taking a lot of the ownership away from the artists just for giving them, menial funds basically. And then came.
Did he cut out for you
Lost you,
guys?
Larry.
Yeah, we
We
lost
lost
you.
him.
That's all right.
Yeah. Well,
Hey,
I
can I
wanted
ask
to
a
add
question of
to
Ken while we're
can
waiting? Can I ask a
can I
question of?
add to that? So Delaware, so I mean, I understand that people think the record labels are
CD
all evil.
transport.
Oh, you
Excuse
cut
me.
out. You cut out for like
Oh,
a
sorry.
minute.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Yeah,
can.
someone was calling me.
Oh, go ahead, finish.
Okay, yeah. So there's also a track for free music that was already happening prior to people stealing music. And the best way to give free music away was the internet during the early 2000s and late 90s.
So the problem with, I think a lot of people don't understand too, like back then during that hip hop era. So the record companies not only like it costs, money for marketing, publishing, and a few other host of things, but a lot of people were not conscious enough or aware enough that they need to read their contracts. That's where I don't know if anybody knows the group NWA, but the big reason why they broke up was because not Dr. Dre, Ice Cube realized that um, like he actually read his contract and saw how much money he wasn't getting, and most of it was going to his manager and record label. So I don't want to say yes, the record company has ripped off a lot of artists, but that was because they played on their ignorance of not knowing their contracts and what they could get. But I mean, there's that too. So I don't want to paint the record labels as these like evil entities. They did what businesses do. They looked out for their bottom line and their best interest. It's awesome now because of people like Ice Cube who encouraged and actually trained or shared their knowledge of the industry to tell artists like you need to be able to read your contract, you need to understand the information, or you need to understand the percentages and do the math and stuff like that. And that's where a lot of these issues lie. A lot of people not understanding their contracts.
Hey, El,
John, did you
you
want to
But
speak?
also,
Yeah, I had a
I,
question
I
for
just
Ken.
that's not
I
I had
just
true.
a
want to
question for
very
Ken.
Can we
quickly
let
respond
John
to
go
something.
first?
Yeah,
John, go
if I
ahead.
could just ask a
Okay.
question of Ken. I don't know how many people have seen the documentary slash mockumentary on Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder tour, but there are some fictitious insertions in there. And there's one scene where he's dealing with his label, And Ken, if you've seen that, I'd love to know if you think that's part of the documentary or the mockumentary that's hybrid in that piece.
I haven't seen it, but now I'm going to go look for it. But I did want to respond to what Elle just used when she talked about NWA. She mentioned the manager. So if the manager was in cahoots with the label, that's awful. I've been a manager for a musician, for a guy on Motown. Okay, more of a legacy name, but and really after his career, whatever. I didn't do the Motown contract. I actually, because that was before my time, I actually got his Motown stuff placed on the streamers. By the way, when he was now doing cruise lines, and because that was his stuff came out in vinyl. So, but having been a manager, I'm going to tell you, there's something wrong if the manager isn't always on the same side as the artist. I only got paid when my artist gets paid, period. So there would be no reason for a legitimate manager, a legitimate management contract, where the manager is making money and the artist isn't, because you should just be getting a percentage of what the artist is getting, and it shouldn't be some ridiculous percentage. There's standard percentages that generally are used. You're not supposed to be getting 70-80% of what's supposed to go to the artist. But there've been managers who've stolen from their artists. In fact, this guy whose name I won't mention, but his previous manager actually stole from him, towards the end of his life, because him or his wife needed money. He didn't have insurance for cancer treatments, so he was stealing money for that reason. Yeah, so that's a whole different issue when you have a corrupt manager than the issue with the labels. Anyway, so I'm done speaking.
Tyler, it's
Now,
Luis.
can I speak? This is Pat in Twitter space.
Go ahead, Pat, and then who was trying to jump in next? So we'll go to them next.
Luis.
Luis, oh sure. Go ahead, Pat, and then Luis.
Okay. Just to say that we are all human after all, but it's interesting the whole discussion.
Well, that's kind of debatable, but go ahead.
It's interesting, the whole discussion about this actually has been there since the music industry really started, and technology worked alongside in tandem in developing things, because not just about ripping CDs and ripping whatever we did in the 90s and hundreds, but before that, the 70s and 80s, you were ripping them through cassettes, or tape or other, whatever tapes they were back then, I can't remember now. But, back then there was a phrase of for personal use. And you could record things on cassette as long as you use them personally. Who was monitoring that? God only knows. But there was obviously exploitation of that, and people passed their cassettes around. But anyway, it's intrinsic to the whole industry. And by and large, we are actually progressing towards a much more open and accountable sort of system in the world. And hopefully people like Taylor Swift and Gaga and whoever are trying to make this right and actually get artists to get the right sort of remuneration for their effort and their talent. And hopefully this will go somewhere. But, there is something that's interesting just very quickly about Clubhouse that has intrigued me, that sometimes music gets used. And I always wonder who gets the copyright for that, because I don't see that it says anywhere where anything is relayed to artists or whatever the music is used. Thanks. My contribution. That was all.
Okay. That's where the Spotify's version of Clubhouse is very interesting, because Spotify has all the licenses and can do all the data to track which songs are played in their versions, and then they intentionally want songs to be played, because every song that gets played, they count those as streams, like Spotify listens. And so ostensibly the artists love it too. So and then the artists have an incentive to go in and play their own songs in their own rooms, and now you've got virtual concerts, then they can start charging for entry to those concerts.
Mm-hmm. Tyler,
Because,
there's a company in DC actually that tracks all of the streaming services. I actually had gotten a job offer for them. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a company that actually tracks any of the satellite radio, any of the streaming services, Apple, Spotify, all of them. They do all the reporting, and they get all any type of data that you want, and then they push that out to everyone else, so then they can also get an idea about how much money they're missing and the percentages that they need to get. But it's located in DC.
yeah,
I think Luis wants to speak next, right?
Yeah, 1 second, Luis. I believe, and maybe Gray in the audience who works at Clubhouse could correct me if I'm wrong, that Spotify's position is that they are enabling creators to create audio experiences, and it's up to that creator to be responsible for how they're using copyrighted content. And so if the like a store, stores are also responsible for how they play music in their stores, and they should be reporting any use of any copyrighted content and paying for the licenses for that stuff, and so should creators in this room, which is why I used to use David Bowie's what is it, Major Tom, when people were missing, like as Evan was missing an hour ago, and I was like, hey Evan, where are you? I normally would have played, Ground Control to Major Tom, and I no longer do, even though it's a very tiny snippet of that song. The reason I stopped doing that was because of precisely that reason. And anyways, so what else can I say? To Ken's point, one of the more interesting aspects is not only when the manager's in cahoots with the labels, which does happen from time to time, much more commonly, the attorneys are in cahoots with the labels, because there's a whole lot of managers, hundreds, if not thousands of them. There's actually an incredibly small number of legit music industry attorneys. They're all very well known in the music industry. And they, over time, as a career, could be more in bed with the labels than the artists, because the artists come and go, but the labels don't. So who do you think over time they'll become more loyal to, after all? And if your attorney, who you're paying, is more in line with the label, well then, oh wow, what do you know? There's a term in your contract that got by, that gave away your streaming rights and whatnot. And that's what that whole article was about. As I'm reading it, as somebody who had a major label deal with Capitol Records in 2001, they knew back then they wanted to own the digital streaming rights, because they knew digital streaming was going to be a thing before the artists did, and they put that in there. And what the UK CMA is going to find out is precisely that these labels screwed over all of their artists by securing all of their streaming rights when at a time when the artists didn't even realize the value of them, and sell those streaming rights to those streaming platforms, and the streaming platforms have no choice but to pay those streaming rights owners, which are the labels. The streaming rights platforms are more than happy to have you as an unsigned artist on their platforms, and will put you in their playlist, and you can have a profile and all that jazz, and that's all great. But what they're going to find out is it's really the labels who have screwed over the artists, and why the artists aren't making anything on their streams, essentially. So it's very obvious what's going to happen there. As much as that article repeatedly said it's complex or whatever, honestly, it's not complex at all. The record labels are vampires, and they screwed over their artists, and I'm speaking from very personal experience. So that's not complex. It's it's just as I just said. It's as simple as that, and everyone in the music biz knows it. So anyway, yeah, they'll figure it out in about, I don't know how long it'll take them. They'll have to go out for lunch together and have an artist explain what happened, and then it'll be real simple.
Hey, Tyler, I mean, I probably no one's tweeting this stuff out, because we probably thought the Neil Young Spotify was a story from 2 days ago. Apparently now there's a lot more stories coming out. The Verge is carrying a story that Apple is now making a bold, marketing proclamation. Really, they're now the home of Neil Young, because they're trying to take advantage of the fact that he's not on Spotify anymore. And the Washington Post is running an article, which basically it was more of a very long opinion piece than an article. I would say, not a news story, but a very long opinion piece, that basically Spotify is not a music company; it's a tech company trying to make profits. Like, God forbid,
Can I speak after Luis?
Sure, we'll go to. Thank you. It's going to be amazing if Spotify, which by the way, doesn't want to take, even if they are considering taking down the Joe Rogan episode, which I guarantee you they are at least considering it, because as somebody correctly pointed out, they've already removed dozens of his previous episodes for far less things, by the way. So it's possible that they're debating it internally. And one of the conclusions they may or may not have come to is, we don't want to get a reputation for pandering to the flash mobs, because that you don't want to put yourself in that position where you're seen as constantly reacting to the flash mobs. That you want to be seen as making very thoughtful decisions long term, and you don't want to create an environment where flash mobs can dictate what's happening on your platform. So they might
Here's
wait.
the funny thing, people are talking about Neil Young, but R. Kelly's music is still on Spotify.
Yeah, but
and a few other.
let me finish the point here, because it is still very likely that they will remove that singular episode a week or two from now, and then Neil can come back, right? Because now there's more heat because of, you see what Apple, just as Ken or Evan said about what Apple's doing in promoting Neil Young. Neil's already starting to look like the genius that I already told you he was. Now, what happens when Spotify a week or two from now, after the flash mob have cooled down, and Spotify removes it, not by pandering to the mob, but based on their own decision-making process? Then Neil comes back, and who wins? Neil lost nothing. Neil wins tremendously. It was a PR masterstroke on Neil's part if that happens. And I'm telling you now, that's likely to happen. So let's see how it plays out. Anyway, we were going to go to Luis and then David, if I recall correctly. Luis?
Thank you, Tyler. My question is actually to you because it's fascinating. You have the experience, the vision, and the understanding of both sides from music and technical of what happened in late '90s and 2000s. And my question is, yesterday there was a very cool room of a musician who was formed. She broke it down for us as the record label formed the group. These were young girls right out of high school or in high school, and they gained success. And they were too unexperienced and just basically naive in the contract deals that really put them in a position where, it's the same story. They got very little, next to nothing. My questions to her were, my experience in the music industry was from music videos. And we had a point in the late '90s and early 2000s where our budgets were $450,000 commonly. And then after the Napster and LimeWire and all the streaming stuff really took off, it destroyed the record label in so many ways that we all got to experience and see. My question to her was, how did it affect her? And she said, due to the fact that she got such little in royalties and so little money, and they were still starving, she wanted the record labels to suffer and to die. Ultimately, sadly, it destroyed everything. But that was her perspective at that point in time. She was about 10,000 albums short of going gold, and everything just really destroyed and it never regained again. What was your experience like during that period? Can you break it down a little bit?
Sure. By the way, my dear friends in 30 Seconds to Mars, who I toured with, and I did at one point tell one of our touring stories where we were in Las Vegas and Jared Leto and I were being arrested, or he did get arrested, and I sat next to him and they couldn't arrest me because I hadn't done anything wrong. And it's a very funny story for those who were here for that. Anyway, 30 Seconds to Mars is very remarkable. They got so screwed by Virgin, their label, where they were selling out stadiums and had not been paid. And they ended up making a movie of their lawsuit of suing Virgin over that. And this is not at all unusual. It's incredibly commonplace to have to sue your label, to audit, to get the actual data, to properly do the accounting, to get paid. That's very normal. So, and the to the point about art labels creating artists and acts or bands or whatever you want to call them, that happens all the time. Black Eyed Peas, the young lady who ended up joining Black Eyed Peas later, that was Ron Fair at God, what label?
Fergie.
Fergie, yeah.
Yeah, Fergie's joining Black Eyed Peas. That was a label decision because Ron Fair, who was kind of the A&R guy at Interscope at the time, thought there was something missing from Black Eyed Peas to give them mainstream appeal, and he's like, "We need to add in this girl who I know who's an independent artist who was looking for a record deal. Well, let's put those two things together." And Ron Fair made Black Eyed Peas what people know it to be today, and he internally in the music business is credited from the label executive's perspective, and these people all know each other intimately and dine and lunch with each other endlessly, just like the Wall Street traders do. And it's their own internal circular little cobble, or for lack of a better word. And there's all kinds of crazy, shady shit that goes on in that industry. And it's honestly, my own personal story was the label got wise to the fact that I did understand the recording contract we were signing, and I refused to sign a bad deal, and they realized that, and then I became an enemy to them. And so,
hey, I'd like to add to what I guess the whole breakdown with tech and music when you're finished, Tyler.
okay, but I stepped over David. Lewis asked me something, and David wanted to go next. But long story short, labels don't like intelligent artists for the most part, who understand their ability, and can protect themselves from being screwed. And I can't take credit myself. It's because I used to work with the Stone Temple Pilots and Smashing Pumpkins and a whole lot of other big acts who coached me leading up to the signing and said, "Don't deal with those attorneys; they're sharks. Use this attorney. He'll actually, or this female attorneys though. By the way, who was actually my first pick, but it gets very incredibly messy during a label signing, and someday I'll tell you the nuanced, crazy, batshit crazy, unbelievable, crazy drama that unfolded during our signing and all of that shenanigans. It's ridiculous and pitiful, and it made me jaded and bitter about the whole industry. It made me realize it was going to die eventually, and that the tech side would eventually win, and yada yada yada. But David, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. I want to. This has been a really great masterclass. Such a great conversation with regards to how the publishing of music has changed in these different phases. And I wanted to come back to what in my opinion, the point is in this point in history, which is we have influencer power, which is fine, but we have misinformation, right? And it's kind of what Neil Young is showing us, what he's catalyzing. I just get thrown back into the '60s when I was born, wasn't? But there were artists that were against the war in Vietnam, and it catalyzed such a monstrous pop cultural movement and social movement that I'll add it to my list of what I pray for, which is that at a minimum we have a conversation, and I'll take something you threw in the air, Tyler, about Neil Young doing a jujitsu move right on Spotify to get potentially a PR kind of thing happening here. I would say we could only hope that since our legislators are dragging on their behinds, that art again leads a cultural awareness and demands to start to have a better way of how we handle misinformation across not just Rogan, but across social platforms and music and all of it. So I just wanted to redirect the spotlight on that. Thanks.
Let me respond real quick, and then I think Elle wanted to jump in next. David Bowie, who not only was a genius artist, but just a genius mind generally.
Tyler, I think that was Lisa who wanted to jump
Yeah,
in
it's
next, by the way.
Lisa.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. So David
Yeah, it
Bowie.
was Lisa, not Elle.
Perfect, thank you. So David understood the music business as well, and by the way, even made what one people might even think of as one of the first NFTs, of the ability for artists to own the album and all of that. He was doing that back in the 70s and 80s. So David Bowie, truly one of the smartest people to ever play in the music business as an artist, and understood technology perhaps better than any artist before, during, or since his time, also made a great point, that if he, in the later stages of his career, he said, if I was starting out today, I wouldn't do music at all. I would be doing a tech startup, because that's how you change society today, is as a tech founder, a startup founder, not as a musician. The social movement power is kind of shifted from the hands of the lead singer to the CEO of a tech startup. And I think he's got a very valid point, as he usually does. So over to you, Lisa.
Yeah, so I was one of those too that's a creative, and like I think my first week of working at NASA, I actually drove down to San Diego and did the whole American Idol thing. Got all the way to Hollywood Week. At this time, they had a partnership with 19 Records. I was on season 11, and basically 19 Records said one of the parents had asked this question, and I think everyone else was scared. She asked, what would happen if you get to the top 10 but you don't make that final one, right? You're not the winner. And they said, oh, well, we have a year and a half to decide what it is we want to do with you. And if you're not somebody that we really X and Y and Z, then basically we'll push you out into the world. So it made sense why you never heard anybody from the top 10 ever come back out or rename themselves or do a lot. And for the first couple of seasons, you've seen people branch out on their own. But I guess when they saw how much money the people were making when they branched out on their own, they wanted to be very centralized. So then the deal, which you see Fantasia and Kelly Clarkson and Ruben Studd and all those people were like, oh yeah, well they made it. But you think about the last, I say 10 years after that, you didn't really see people after they got top 10, whatever happened to them. There's a reason. It's in the contract, right? So as I was going through these different rounds, the contracts got thicker and thicker. And the last contract that I have, um, it's about 86 pages long. And they did a whole psyche vow that was like over 600 questions. So they know who you are, and they run it through a like almost like like a lie detector test or whatever. Like the psychologist is there in a trailer. Like it's a whole shit, right? So um when it when it hit me, all these things that were going on, um and I made it pretty far. I was like the last 150 contestants out of like 100,000 people. um I saw what it was, and I was glad that I didn't make it because I wasn't ready. The kind of stuff that was in that contract at that time was they could change who you are, the songs you sing, the genre you're in, and your look. If they want you to wear glasses because it's more appealing, if they want you to wear a leather jacket, make you like a badass, change your hair, like all of that goes with the brand. So if you didn't have a brand and if you didn't have an identity that was already selling, then they would potentially identify you to be something or someone. And proof of work and proof of stake when it comes to um branding who you are, even as an artist, all the way down to crypto, it's the same thing. So Cardi B was one of the ones, the reason why she was so epic was because she already had the proof of work by having over 1 million people follow her on other platforms, including Instagram. She had already had 1 million followers. She was on Vine. She was a personality before she was able to land that gig on a reality show, and she still was able to be who she was. People liked who she was, and so when it came time for the deal, um, that was her formula, and it was a proven model. Literally, it was a proven business model. So as far as marketing, so she was able to keep that, right? So that was very important. That was a very, very important thing to see. And a lot of artists, she gained the respect of a lot of artists because of that, and they've never seen that before. Um, so that was important. So basically, I had decided to write my PhD on project management in the entertainment industry because while I was doing American Idol, I actually went back for the second and third year, got to final rounds, but my plight wasn't to get accepted. It was literally to watch the changes in production over the course of time, and a lot of things changed in those 3 years. And the way they condensed everything, mine was like a couple months apart. And it gave me time to brush up on my skills and put money into, my art, and be like, okay, well, you made it to this round, so you pay for this much more. Lessons, the royalties with who they pay, and the licensed songs that you were able to sing. The song lists changed, and it was based off of the Billboard top whatever, and the people that the rights that they owned or their partners owned to the songs that gave them more money. And it was so crazy because you're just looking at like a song list to pick from, but those songs have like royalties and rights and licenses that they've either already paid for or had partnerships with the people who own that, and they still already get royalties from it, right? And I had noticed that the people who had the best projects, of course, had the budget, which is then goes to the advancements that they give people, which is just one obscene credit card. I mean, a credit card with like an obscene amount of money. So if you have a certain amount of Grammys or whatever, it goes into an algorithmic formula to where they say, okay, we're going to give you this advancement, but it's only a loan, and you're not really privy to like how much the studio time costs, how much it costs per hour. It's a lot of finances, and they know a lot of creatives are not quantitative. So that's how they get you. So a lot of people should look into people's story like Tony Braxton, and TLC was the first to come out. So there's a lot of data on what happened with TLC because they were the first group to really, really, really be open about it. Then slide down to Kanye West. But before I say something about Kanye West, when I was doing my research about project management in the entertainment industry, I started because I was a professional dancer and I used to go over to Debbie Reynolds, and I basically did ballet, tap, and jazz too. I was like a whole ass creative. So it allowed me to get into spaces for people who were actually going on tour and performing with these people, from Missy Elliott to Rihanna to Alicia Keys, like you name it. Like half those dancers I knew. So I was like, okay, what about the people who support the artists? How are they affected by the budget that the artists have? Because they're behind the artist, which means they get a subset fractional percentage of whatever the artists make. And that's when I found out that the people who support the artists, they were more subjected to suicide ideation because of the instability of the money that was flowing into the artist, to the budget, and to the project. So, of course, my university was not some university that was funded by the film and entertainment industry. So even I was trying to solicit my topic to them and basically telling them I had access, but because it wasn't in the interest of the university, like they trashed my shit. But and I didn't even know how schools worked. I just knew that I wanted to write something meaningful, and I actually stayed in LA for a long period of time just to have access to the people, just so I can write about these things that were going on. But the more that I dipped into my PhD, which is project management, right? Cost, performance, and schedule, and when you release these projects and how the business models are to fund the projects, I started going into that. And then that's when I started to see a whole bunch of things. When I tell you I went down a really beautiful rabbit hole, it led back into tech, because the reason why you have the cloud, right? I was reading these Chinese researchers, and they were talking about CPMS. So people know it as like B2B, B2C, um C to C, and now they got D to C, right? Direct to consumer. But like just like how you see Clubhouse is the best example, right? Because you have back channel. But just because you're in the back channel, you're the consumer that's soliciting products to other consumers, but then your back channel is like a B2C, with your business being able to talk to the consumer. So it's really like a double layer C to C, because you don't know the Clubhouse back channel and the algorithms and the things that they're pulling from you or the customers that they have within this app. So and all these business decisions. So with the Chinese, researchers were saying with CPMS, it's consumer product manufacturing and supply chain. And if you had all of that talking to each other in real time, essentially for you to optimize efficiency and streaming and everything that you do, you would put it on a cloud, which is um, uh, the whole thing with getting as close to real time of transactional information as you can. And so the best way to explain that is, you know how you had car manufacturing, right? So you got
We don't have to go all into that though.
Oh, okay. All right. Bye. I mean, let me put myself on mute. Sorry.
And also, right, that's going to go, that new chapter you were unfolding it's a whole room in itself. But you're right. I came to the same point you did, which is in the end, the tech side. The more you,
Yeah, and that's where you get the Napster and stuff
yeah,
from. So they broke the code where, hey, we're gonna do peer to peer, the C to C. If
yeah.
you already bought it, then you won't have to pay for it again. You essentially trade between the people who already did, and then the people on the back channel were not getting the money.
And it's interesting. It's relevant to the whole DeFi space in a weird way, because a lot of what people are thinking about in DeFi, artists were thinking about, in the P2P, the peer to peer era of
Yeah,
like,
years ago.
yeah, many years ago. So there's interesting corollaries there for sure. So,
Tyler, we
Tyler,
should.
if I could say
yeah,
something too.
Sarah, I'm going to hand it to Sarah, my dear friend on stage, who worked in music labels for many, many years. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was only going to say, and adding to what you were saying earlier, that we should do a room on this. We should do a session on this.
I
There's
was
the
just going to say
whole
that, Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah
from
does
like
rooms on this regularly. So,
well, we do on the Mondays with a terrible time for the West, but like East America, etc., because we're 1 p.m. in Europe. But aside that, whatever time we do it, I really think I've thought of it, and I know you've mentioned it so many times, Tyler, and comes up with a lot of you here. And I think it would be really interesting for everyone to, when just starts, like Tyler, you often explain, and several of you on stage here, how it works. That one sort of, this is how unbelievable, because people do not believe it is that way, and then go into a discussion and down the, as you said, the beautiful rabbit hole that does lead back to tech, etc. I really think this would be an amazing session
Yeah,
for all of
yeah.
us.
If I could suggest, you might want to have someone familiar with the Nobel Prize in economics that was given for asymmetric negotiation. And this sounds a little distant, but it's really not. And what the recipients of the Nobel Economics Prize illustrated is that when you have systematic asymmetry in negotiation, um, that is, one party knows a lot about the transaction, the other knows very little, that there's a systematic discount. And the example used was used cars. So prior to COVID, used cars are systematically better values than new cars because the buyers discount the representations made by the seller, because the seller knows everything and the buyer can't validate it, at least prior to a lot of the instrumentation of the vehicles. And so the relevance to the music industry is the asymmetry between the labels and the artists and other aspects, and the relevance to technology is that there's potential for DeFi to level the playing field around all kinds of negotiations, not just in the music industry, but elsewhere. So the music industry and the artists versus labels is sort of emblematic of a much bigger issue that DeFi could play a pretty big role in.
That's a
Yeah.
really interesting angle. I agree.
okay.
Tyler, if I can say something as well, if we can just add in. You were talking about your experience when you were signed to a label, and I know you don't want to turn this into the music hour right now, but to also piggyback on what Sarah just said, if there's, I think maybe sooner than later, a lot of people that are also in your rooms are listening to this. I mean, you were talking about David Bowie and other people that have been in yesterday. We were talking about Neil Young, and there's a lot of artists. I worked with David Bowie on the Glass Fighter tour and Pink Floyd, and back in the day, I mean, there was a lot of artists talking and trying to, as much as they could, as much as the PR companies and as much as the labels would allow them to, they were trying to kind of forewarn and talk about some of their challenges and the issues that they had with whether it was management or record companies, but mostly about their rights and their licensing and publishing. And then afterwards, some people were listening. I mean, I guess if you want to look back, we can go back to the Elvis era forward. And then you had the 80s where there was just so much money coming into the economy. There was just so much money pumping into the record business and the labels and the advances that people were getting, that everyone just kind of, even though they might have known what the problems could have been as far as their rights and their publishing, they kind of just said, screw it, let's just go ahead and get this advance. We'll make money from tours and other outlets. And then, 80s and 90s, I should say. And then later on, I think it was, you know, um, sorry, it was Lisa. Lisa was just talking. You know, we had artists like TLC. We had the hip hop industry that started to really come forward, and they started to, as much as they could, try to actually, you know, grab their rights and try to bring up this topic and make it, you know, through their music, make it more into the mass market, as far as like in bringing attention to it. And then things slowly start to change a bit. But I think what I'm trying to say is based on also what Sarah was just saying. Tyler, you just said you have so much experience from this. I'm sure that in your rooms, you've got people that are also involved. Look, my background is also music business management and marketing. You know, for more than 30 years of my life has been doing this from East and West. And there's a lot of people that could use the example, like you said, you know, you were talking to the Smashing Pumpkins and these other artists that were telling you what, you know, what worked for them and what didn't work as well as it could have. And I think that this is something that there's an opportunity here that also correlates and is kind of chains into the links chained into what's happening also in the world of technology. So I think, you know, I think sooner than later, if you do something like that, I'm sure you're going to bring a lot of help to people that may really need to hear from you and your experience and to kind of, you know, help it and also somehow match it to, you know, what you're doing and how you're doing it right now. So I think if Sarah, if you do that room, I think, you know, you and I have talked in the past before. I'd love to also jump in on that and show support in any way I can.
Okay, well, we got 20 minutes and we got 5 more stories here. I just want to blaze through with Jeff G shares this one from CNN that Olympic sponsors paid big money to be sponsors of the Beijing Games. Sponsors of the Olympics are walking a tightrope ahead of the Beijing Winter Games next month as worsening geopolitical tensions force them to consider canceling. And yeah, that can be a problem. To be continued if that ends up happening. The next one is a tweet from TikTok. It says, turning TikTok into sales is easier than ever thanks for our new partnership with Square. Learn more here. And so Square is helping people in creatives sell on TikTok, which is called social commerce. And we've talked about that nearly every day for 9 months, although not so much in the past couple of weeks. But if you've been with us for more than a minute, then you know that's one of my predictions and endless rants was that all of the social media companies were going to become e-commerce. And I just tweeted this out so you can see it with your own eyes at the Tech News Twitter account. I retweeted the TikTok tweet about TikTok sales. And then the next one is from Olu in the audience, that suicide hotlines share data with for-profit spin-off raising ethical questions, raising ethical concerns and questions. From Politico, it's a piece, and Cheryl also shared this one in my DMs. That Crisis Text Line is one of the world's most prominent mental health support lines, a tech-driven nonprofit that uses big data and AI to help people cope with traumas such as self-harm, emotional abuse, and thoughts of suicide. But the data the charity collects from its online text conversations with people in their darkest moments does not end there. The organization's for-profit spinoff uses a sliced and repackaged version of that information to create a market customer service software. Crisis Text Line says any data it shares with that company, called Loris AI, has been wholly anonymized, stripped of any details that could be used to identify people who contacted the helpline in distress. Both entities say their goal is to improve the world, in Loris's case, making customer support more human, empathetic, and scalable. In turn, Loris has pledged to share some of its revenue with Crisis Text Line. The nonprofit also holds an ownership stake in the company, and the two entities shared the same CEO for at least a year and a half. The two call their relationship a model for how commercial enterprises can help charitable endeavors thrive. So what is the issue here? Somebody from a fellow at Stanford University says these are people at their worst moments. Using that data to help other people is one thing, but commercializing it just seems like a real ethical line for a nonprofit to cross. A former federal regulator said that she thought it would be problematic for third-party companies to have access even to anonymized data, even though she cautioned that she was unfamiliar with the companies involved. And the nonprofit vice president and general counsel said in an email to Politico that Crisis Text Line obtains information consent from each of its texters, and that the organization's data sharing practices are clearly stated in the terms of service and privacy policy to which all texters consent in order to be paired with a volunteer crisis. There it is right there. You clicked I agree. It was clearly stated in 2-point font, and you clearly read it and you agreed by clicking the button. There you have it. You have the actual people saying that it was in clear black and white, and you accepted. So what's the problem? So the next story is from PT Yoder, that Fry's DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, wants to start a crypto crowdfunded fast food franchise. First historical documents, then a golf course, now maybe a Wendy's near you. What will DAOs think of next? Something tells me that a DAO is not going to be able to make a fast food franchise, but let's see what happens. The next is that Tata, one of the main massive conglomerates out of India, the Tata Group, India's Tata Group, took control of state-run airline carrier Air India on Thursday. We kind of knew that was coming already. And, here's that suicide hotline story again from Cheryl. So we can save that. And that we have the end of today's session, 15 minutes ahead of a 3-minute, but would that have been 10?
Oh,
Yeah.
Tyler, did you go over the maybe I missed it, the microcapacitor, the batteries from Korea unit? It's from CASE, which is the technology school in Korea. It kind of tied into your battery article that you had, because they're actually actively working on solving the problem of energy waste with wearables and creating devices that actually um, will store will store additional battery life or energy so you can power things, but also too for any of those IoT devices that we use that are constantly on. They're also solving the problem of trying to make sure that they aren't constantly on by because they're wasting energy. So that was one of the articles I shared along with the gamifying researchers for cancer researchers are gamifying, I guess, research, cancer research specifically. They're asking gamers to play a game to solve problems as they monitor their vitals during that time, and it's to help them capture real-time data around the world. So they'll have more data without having to go and do specialized groups and all this other stuff. It'll just be instantaneous. So that was another one as well.
Cool. I just pinned your eco-friendly micro supercapacitors using fallen leaves to the top of the clubhouse room. I think that's the one you were referring to.
Yeah, that was the first one. And then the second one, which I think everyone's going to like, is the cancer research one, which is kind of cool. Like they can collect massive amount of data with a video game.
Okay.
That
Right.
sounds interesting.
I lost my voice, so we'll have to pause there. And
Drink some water.
Yeah, we will pick it up tomorrow is Saturday, so we might not meet tomorrow, and we definitely don't meet on Sundays. So we might meet on Monday, but I wish you all a very happy weekend. And I think there's a few Tech News Club related rooms coming up over the weekend. There usually are. So to see those, click on the Tech News Club calendar above the top of the room.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Thank you. Drink water.
I will. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Tyler.
Betrayed.
Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you.
Bye,
Happy
everybody.
Thanks,
Friday.
Tyler. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.